Well, good evening, everyone. This is Gary Trendle, Chair of the Planning Board, and I hereby call our meeting to order for March 15th, 2021 at 7:01 p.m. This open meeting of the Hopkinton Planning Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID virus. So we are a year into this now. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID virus, we are complying with the executive order that suspends the requirement of open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. All members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The executive order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely as long as the public body makes provision through adequate alternative means to ensure interested members of the public are provided reasonable access to the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. It will further include several public hearings. For this meeting, the Planning Board is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted in the town's web meeting calendar and the board's agenda identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting is being broadcast by HCAM through multiple platforms. All supporting materials that have been provided to the members of this body are available on the town's website via the web meeting calendar, unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. Before we begin our first agenda item, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure adequate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will invite board members to provide any comments, questions, or motions. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in dialogue with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. Not every agenda item will feature public comment, although as everyone knows, we are very open to public comment on virtually every topic. For items with public comment, all participants should use the raise your hand feature in Zoom, then wait to be acknowledged. All participants must begin by stating their name and address, and participants must limit their comments to 3 minutes or less. So finally, each vote will be taken by a roll call vote. I do look forward to live meetings where we don't need to do a roll call vote for everything. So at this point, members, when I call your name, if you can respond in the affirmative. Rob Benson.
Present, right here.
Muriel Kramer.
Muriel Kramer here.
Jane Moran.
Jane Moran present.
Dave Paul.
Dave Paul here.
Mary Larson Marlowe.
Mary Larson Marlowe here.
Deb Feinberg.
Deb Feinberg here.
Sundar Sivarman.
Sundar Sivarman present.
And Fran DeYoung.
Fran DeYoung present.
And staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mr. Gelsich.
John Gelsich present.
Ms. Pemberton.
Stephanie Pemberton present.
And Mr. Paradise.
Bill Paradis from Beta present.
All right, thanks everyone. Really quickly, just want to cover off our agenda for tonight. We do have a reasonable number of administrative items that we're going to cover up front, and we'll get to those in a moment. We have the continued public hearing for Wilson Street, Cedar Street amendment to solar special permit. And we do want to make sure that we get to a vote on that tonight. And then we'll get into, we're continuing, but starting our discussions for the proposed tree clearing / protection bylaws. Tell you what, just as a formality, let's go ahead and open up our public hearing. So I will entertain a motion to open the public hearing for Wilson Street, Cedar Street, and for the proposed zoning bylaw amendment and for the proposed general bylaw amendment.
Rob Benson, so moved.
Rob with the motion, Sundar with the second. Assuming no discussion, we will vote. Mr. Benson, how do you vote?
Rob Benson, yes.
Ms. Kramer?
Muriel Kramer, yes.
Ms. Moran?
Jane Moran, yes.
Mr. Paul?
Dave Paul, yes.
Ms. Larson Marlowe?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Ms. Feinberg?
Deb Feinberg, yes.
Mr. Sivarman?
Sundar Sivarman, yes.
Mr. DeYoung?
Fran DeYoung, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes. All right, so the first action item we have, the first agenda item we have tonight is, I think, a very interesting. It's going to be a fairly brief presentation and a much more active discussion with Dawn Alcott Miller about the intersection of mental health and planning. And before I hand over the mic to Dawn, or the screen, or whatever we say, just want to say when this, so this is something that Norman had first approached us about. And to be candid, I was a little skeptic because I'm like, we're the planning board, we're not the mental health group. And just in terms of the discussion and thinking a lot more about this, I think that there is so much impact on overall mental health that occurs with how we develop and how we plan communities in our town. And very much a long-term initiative. I don't necessarily know if there's any immediate actions that we take out of this, but I thought it was worth having this discussion. And maybe as a group, we can brainstorm some ways to better incorporate, long-term mental health into our evaluations and objectives of the planning board moving forward. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Dawn, and if you want to just quickly introduce yourself, and we'll get into the discussion.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I'm Dawn Alcott Miller. I'm the director of Hopkinton Youth and Family Services. And like Gary shared, we were in this conversation with Norman. And, I wasn't entirely clear of where the conversation was going to go that day either, but he has that 300-foot view. And we were just finishing our strategic plan and having a conversation, Norman and I, and he said, one of the things we were talking about was building healthy communities and shifting community culture for mental health. And he said, I've got to get you in with the planning board. So lo and behold, he set up a meeting, and there we all were. And so how did I get to the planning board? One of our main goals is primary prevention, and that's intervening before a problem starts. And that can happen. A very common example that's on our lips right now is vaccinations, right? That we can wrap our head around. You want to stop that virus before it starts, right? And so you get the vaccine. It can be altering risky behavior, but it can also mean creating communities that enhance safety and well-being through policy, zoning, and design. And we wondered what other departments might have synergies with this work that, we're committed to primary prevention. And instead of kids falling in the river and us plucking them out, finding out why they're falling in the first place. And it's a multifaceted reason usually, but sometimes it can be how communities are built. And in our conversation that day, we were talking about how suburban communities have high rates of depression, high rates of anxiety, and high rates of mental unwellness. And we were wondering, why is that? And there was a researcher that we talked about who writes a lot about how suburban communities are built for adults, and youth in these communities don't always thrive because communities aren't really built for them. And so we engaged in that discussion for a while and what that all meant. And my even stepping back from that is that those are pieces to the puzzle, but more so the questions of how do we build a community that really sustains mental health. And Hopkinton has so much going for it. I look at the green space, I look at the trails, and I look at the places, just the common and the beautiful meeting space that people have. And I look at, the different communities that have popped up that somebody had mentioned Legacy Farms, that you can drive through at any time and see people chatting with each other and kids out socializing and the community focus that's there. So there's so much going for it. But before we go further, mental health, what is it? The WHO defines it as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes their own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. And health usually is a positive term. And somehow when we say mental health, people get it conflated with mental illness rather than wellness being a community-wide goal that involves every element of community life and even in the planning process. And so what community determinants impact health and well-being? Like, well, we know that people, place, and equitable opportunity kind of come together to form, those are the structural drivers that form community. It's people, place, and equitable opportunity. And within that, there's the norms and culture of a community. There's the participation and willingness to act for the common good and social networks and trust. But where it comes down to you guys, it's really that place, the look and feel and safety. Like how the community looks impacts how people have self-esteem and how they feel about themselves. And the parks and open space has to do with where they can recreate and getting around, whether there's enough transportation or adequate transportation for all residents, that matters. And, for some low income residents, they don't always have vehicles. And so you think about how communities sometimes place the low income housing far away from everything and where nobody can get to where they need to go, even the grocery store. And how housing works and how housing is built and looked at is the low income housing just as nice as other housing? Or is it built in such a way that, creates less dignity and less sense of self-worth? And what's sold in a community and how it's promoted, like if to get real controversial, like a pot shop opened on Main Street and there are big billboards on Main Street, talking about the efficacies of pot, right? That might not be great for the teenagers and the kids seeing that all the time, right? Because they perceive it as being very safe for them, much like how alcohol has worked into our culture, right? That kids perceive it as very safe because they see it all around them all the time. And so it's air, water, and soil, and whether that's healthy and safe, and it's arts and cultural expression. And I think about, how fortunate you are to have the Center for the Arts and what that brings to the community and allows for the community to do. And then there's equity and, living wages and local wealth and education. It's a great education system. And yes, but is it really inclusive of everyone? And is everyone at the table in these discussions when we think about equity? And who do we invite when we think about how to create Hopkinton in the future and what to work into planning? And so I have more questions than I have answers. It's a topic that inspires me, that gets me thinking, and makes me think beyond just the clinical work and the intimate face-to-face that we often have. And one of our biggest goals is prevention and trying to shift community culture so many kids aren't suffering and that they can be productive adults in their community life. So I'll leave it there and kind of open it to thoughts and ideas, because I think that's where it starts. It starts with all of you. You know what you do, but thinking of mental health, how can it connect?
And Don, you hit on a lot of themes there. If I can just make a couple of quick comments. Number one, it sounds like we should call it mental wellness, not mental health, because I agree with you. There's certainly a stigma around mental health that probably doesn't quite describe what we're trying to do. Secondly, I'd argue this isn't just about youth. It's about all of us and the role that community plays. Just as an example, I look at, where I live, we get a lot of pedestrian traffic from the Center Trail. And, I can think of some folks that maybe are elderly or live on their own that live near the Center Trail. And I look at how much engagement they get from having some trail connectivity that gives them somebody to respond and react to in a very healthy manner. And I look at, without that, how isolated some of these people might be. And, I think that's just to me, that's a very small example about how, if we put the right thought behind our the work that we do, we can really, I think, to Don's point, prevent some mental health issues down the road. So just from a discussion perspective, maybe we'll open it up to the group, and I'm curious if people, number one, have thoughts about how we can incorporate this perspective into what we do. Secondly, if they have questions for Don, and Don, if you have questions for us, feel free to throw them out there as well. I think, we don't have a ton of time tonight, but I do want to commit another 10 minutes or so to discussion. At this point, we'll open it up and see if people have questions, comments, or thoughts about how we can, again, better incorporate this into our processes and objectives. Fran.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Thank you to the chair. Dawn, as you've kind of developed these thoughts and ideas, I love it with policy, zoning, design, the common space or the common and the green space that we have here. Are there some, ideas that you have around in terms of best in class or other communities that have really elevated, the discussion around, and I agree, Gary, I think it really should be around mental well-being or mental wellness, that we could kind of look to as potential examples, or not just even within the state, across the country. I'd love to hear if anything else comes to mind.
I think there's just a lot out there about urban life. When I knew I was coming and I was searching up suburban planning, it kept hitting urban planning. So I think that's where you could look what cities have done around green spaces and little meeting places. I think of communities that have built pocket parks, like little tiny places that people gather where they build relationships that look like otherwise a dirty patch of grass, right? But they get transformed into something. I don't know of any communities that, are doing this. I'm sure there are folks that are, much deeper into this than I am that would know. But even in my searching, I really struggled to find any articles on suburban life and suburban planning. There's a lot of talk about urban planning for mental health, but not as much for, suburban life.
That just to me kind of speaks to an opportunity, again, to the chair, of what we could do as a community to be kind of leaders, thought leaders and community leaders, to develop this type of mental well-being aspect and incorporate it into our broader kind of holistic plan. And even from the town charter's perspective, all the way down as it filters through what we do.
I know, like when the Youth Commission has talked about these things, there have been members of the Youth Commission that grew up in other suburban communities across the country where, it's different than here, and where like kids could walk into like their community centers that function in a different way. That's, like kids in the inner city have other struggles, like with gangs and other things. So like little community pop-up centers are everywhere, like whether it's Boys and Girls Club, U Inc., and all these different places that kids can go to meet other safe, trusted adults other than their parents, right? So that they can kind of let it out with somebody else, right? And so when they talk about it, they talk about that, like, gosh, we wish we had, more informal places for youth to connect with safe, trusted adults, and that would make it healthier here, So I know that people have different ideas that grew up and moved from other places that are part of the puzzle, but I don't know that full picture. I think you're right. There's opportunity for sure.
Muriel.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. John, thank you for being here. I was also very privileged to be part of that early conversation. And also, even as a social worker, even as somebody who's been invested for a long time, who feels like they have their eyes open, I didn't really see where the planning board's role was. And I'm, I guess I'm really privileged and proud and invested in finding out where this conversation goes. I also rather want to center the conversation. I know mental wellness is very definitely a well-intentioned and terrific term. There's nothing wrong with it. I also want to make sure that I center the conversation also on mental health. And it's a part of normalizing it and destigmatizing it that I think is essentially important. Mental health is something that we should all embrace as a goal and not sort of step away from. So, and I guess what I took away from that conversation, what I've been sort of mulling and so forth, is the ways that we might be aspirational, right, to start with. And that's really, the big picture doesn't come into focus for me yet, but being aspirational and working towards ways that we center some of our planning, all of our planning on mental health, mental wellness, mental awareness seems really important to me. The one thing that I also always kind of want to think about, and it can be hard to do, is the ways that we can be sort of intergenerationally or interfunctionally aware. Like we have this gorgeous senior center, which I celebrate, and we have some community spaces like the respite center that are truly extraordinary. And I think that in the attempt to make sure we preserve space, for example, for the senior center, so the seniors have someplace that is really their own. Sometimes we also exclude other generations, like, and we might want to necessarily have a youth center, but might we also have, some communities have real great success in intergenerational work, a daycare that is also at a senior center that is just vibrantly, incredibly wonderful. Now, I don't want to insist that we put a daycare center at Hopkinton's senior center. That's not the point, but thinking about the ways that we might bring different members of the community, different cohorts and different concerns and different needs of the community together to leverage the richness that comes from all those different facets of the community. It's something I think about a lot and hope that we can look forward to.
I think if we've learned anything from COVID, we've learned that isolation stinks. It's really awful. And so like, how do you break down those barriers? So even if you're out walking, you see more people and their names, like we've become a culture that we don't even know who our neighbors are half the time, and we don't know what they care about or what's meaningful to them. And so, like encouraging that in some way, like in design or in, and I think that's the thing about aspirational. It's, really, the kind of the world is your oyster. You can invite to the table who you want to, and you can have the conversations, and hopefully it's the whole community, and hopefully like you're inviting people that haven't been thought of before, that are frequently left out, like those with lower income or kids, like youth, and I keep saying youth because I'm Hopkinton Youth and Families, but, like think about families, and what's meaningful to them, but also senior citizens, bringing them to the table, like Muriel was saying, and folks that, are often overlooked, those with disabilities that might want to have access to some of these fun spaces that can't get onto the field or can't get there because there's something in their way. Like querying and getting different voices, and different input can be really helpful.
Jane?
Sure. So I'm listening to the conversation as it goes along. And my first thought when you started talking, by the way, thank you very much for your presentation. It's very insightful. Was that how could we get a Boys and Girls Club into Hopkinton? And I don't think that's going to happen. But short of that, I think we would be short-sighted if we didn't look at what we already have to work with. It's a rich community. As you mentioned, we have youth commission. We've got the schools that do so much with our kids. We've got, church youth groups. We've got the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and the 4-H and so many other activities that really do a wonderful job reaching out to all sorts of different communities in town. But having said that, we do have a certain percentage of folks that fall through the cracks, that don't have anyone that they feel that they can be comfortable with. So how do we reach out with the tools that we have, and how do we grasp these folks that we feel might be missing? And it could be, and drawing into that, the planning board's position. Does the planning board have the ability to suggest in our master plan that we have or suggest an ongoing coalition that draws all of these different partners together so that we can then improve and reach out to our folks who are missing, whether they're senior citizens or kids with disabilities or older folks with disabilities or health and service needs, and kind of draw them into the conversation, find out what their needs are, and look to the resources that we have and how can we help them. So I don't know what the planning board can do right now because I don't think we have that as a policy, but maybe the planning board can look to develop something like some language that would reach out and help some of these folks.
And, Jane, I think you make great points. I mean, I would argue there are some things that are very much within our charge as a planning board. And simply that comes back to, again, building communities that foster a sense of community and give people more opportunities to engage with their neighbors. And I think the idea of, pocket parks, and as we're doing subdivisions, why would we not, long term, I mean, build some language into our zoning that does require things like that. And so I think there's a lot of ways, aside from the broader perspective of breaking down some of these barriers and pulling more people together. I think there's some very clear things that fit squarely within our charge that we can do. It's still going to take time, and there's some changes that we would need to make in order to do that. But I think there's actually a lot we can do, particularly if we focus on those topics of engagement and community and giving people more places to safely interact with one another. I know we're almost up on time. Mary, I think you wanted to say something, and if it's okay from there, we'll move on. And so go ahead, Mary.
I'll be quick. Thank you, Don, for bringing this up. And I think that there are some things that we can work on through the subcommittees that have already been formed this year. So, just kind of to kickstart ways of thinking about this within that work. The planning board, it seems that we have started to take on kind of an intersectional view of the many different committees and efforts within town, at least in some of those efforts, the connectivity of trails and sidewalks. That is a very apt place to also add in the concept of pocket parks, so it's not, trails and sidewalks are not just a path to and from, but, stopping along the way. And, affordable housing, we've certainly talked about and could continue to make sure that it's part of our discussion, that the connection of affordable housing to other parts of the community and making sure that it's inclusive, rather than, as Dawn was saying, kind of stuck off in a pocket elsewhere. So I think that I've appreciated the way that planning board is taking on that role of, bringing other committees and specializations together into let's look at this as a whole. And I think that this is a perfect add-on to that, and we can easily incorporate some of those things quickly rather than, just down the road a couple of years. So.
Yeah, totally agree, Mary. Any quick closing comments before we move on to the next topic? We could probably spend most of the night talking about this, but we do have a pretty full agenda tonight.
No, I just want to thank you for having me and echoing what Jane shared. There are so many wonderful things happening in this community. Hopkinton does a lot right. And so it's unifying those efforts so that, it's not so isolated, like not in its own pockets, and so that, and that's one of the things we hope to do through our strategic planning process, really, is to, break down some of those barriers too, so that there's just more available for wellness and mental health in the community. That mental health isn't the fault of the person who is having, to have a mental health issue or mental illness isn't the fault of the person who's having a struggle. It's really their environment too. And it's everything that comes into play, right? And so, like, if we bolster their environment, there's that's one more chance that somebody can be restored to health and be functional again. And so it's one piece, it's not the whole thing, but it is a part of it. And so I so appreciate you considering it, you thinking about it, you talking about it, and you having aspirations towards it. So thank you very much.
Don, thanks so much for joining us. Definitely more to come. Hopefully this is at least kind of made people think a little bit differently about what we do. And again, I think this is just the start, but really appreciate you joining us this evening.
Well, thank you very much. Have a good night.
Okay. Just quickly moving forward, the next item we have is a A&R for 0 North Mill Street. John, do you want to just quickly give us the rundown of what is before us on this?
Share my screen. So let's see, let's get a better picture. So this is the A&R that's before us. I think Joe Marquardon is on here, and I think they are the ones that designed this plan. So basically what the subject of this A&R is, it is for this lot and this lot. This lot is owned by Halt. This lot is owned by the Mungers. There is an existing pool house right here, and I'll zoom in, that crossed over the boundary line. So this is proposing to dissolve this boundary line, create a new boundary line here, give this portion of the lot over to them, and change this lot. This has gone before land court. I don't have the details of that case. I don't know if Maury from Halt or Joe have the details of that case or if it's even necessary, but basically this is a non-buildable parcel that is going to be conveyed over and absorbed by this buildable parcel, or buildable lot. So that is the subject of the A&R.
Through you, Mr. Chair, can I ask, is there compensation for that little piece of property happening?
Gary, we cannot hear you.
Might need to text him.
Yeah, Gary, I don't know if you can hear us. We can't hear you.
Where's Rob?
I'm here. Let's see if Gary comes back.
Hi, good evening. This is Victor Munger, and I am the owner of 10 Emerson. Maury, I believe, is on, and he can confirm this, but we actually worked with Maury back in May of last year, and we agreed to purchase that land from Halt, and both parties agreed. It's been pending really based on COVID, and that's why it's taken this long to get before you. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I don't really need the specifics, but it just seemed like there might be some transaction that benefited Halt that made sense. So I appreciate that.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
All right. Can you guys hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Not sure what happened there. Sorry about that. And Mr. Gasser, I think you're on. Do you have any Halt perspective on this? I'm supportive of it.
Normally, you know, we're more strict on encroachments and things like that into our property, especially conservation land. But in this case, it really, there's no way to fix this other than to sell them this little piece of property. That pool house is a major part of that whole, the pool and the whole structure there. So we agreed to, for this A&R.
Okay. All right. Thanks to both. Any questions from the board? And if there are none, then I will entertain a motion to grant the A&R for 0 North Mill Street.
So moved.
Bob Benson, second. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, we will move to a vote. We'll start with Mr. Benson. Rob Benson, yes. Muriel?
Muriel Kramer, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Deb?
Deb Feinberg, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaram, yes.
Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes. So that will move forward. So thank you both. next on the agenda, we have revised stormwater management erosion control bylaw. And I see that we have Attorney
So,
Lacey here with
through
us.
the chair, just one quick interruption before we move on from the A&R. I will be in
Yes.
the office all day tomorrow. If the planning board members could please stop by and sign the Mylar. I will also be in hopefully Wednesday and Thursday if you can't come tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. All right, so next on the agenda, we have revised stormwater management erosion control bylaw discussion. And I see Attorney Lacey is on with us. So Rebecca, do you want to just quickly introduce why you're coming before us this evening?
Sure, yes, thank you. So I'm Rebecca Lacey from Town Council's office, and I'm here to briefly discuss some proposed revisions to the town's stormwater management and erosion control bylaw. This will eventually be a warrant article for this year's annual town meeting. It'll be sponsored by the Department of Public Works for reasons I'll explain. But because you are the board that administers this bylaw, your input is obviously important, and we would want to come before town meeting with something that you all support. And this, we still have some time before town meeting, so this is just an initial discussion to introduce this, and I can come back if there's a desire for more discussion. So very briefly, I think the planning board members are familiar with what I'm about to say, but just for context for others on at the meeting, some brief background. Excuse me, Hopkinton, along with most other towns in eastern Massachusetts, is subject to a permit from EPA and Mass DEP that regulates the town's discharges from its storm drain system into surface waters. The permit has been in effect since 2003. John Westerling, who's here, the director of the DPW, oversees the town's compliance with the many requirements that are involved in this permit. One of the requirements is for the town to regulate construction activity, regulate stormwater erosion control during construction and stormwater management after construction for projects that disturb more than an acre. The town adopted a stormwater management bylaw in 2008 to comply with the permit that went into effect in 2003. There's now a new version of the permit, and the permit requires the town to impose heightened requirements now on those projects that will mostly be done through the stormwater regulations, which is where the detailed performance standards are located. But in order to ensure that there's adequate authority and other parameters that provide the scope for the regulations, some changes do need to be made to the bylaw. So, and so we in Town Council's office have worked with John Westerling and with staff of the Planning Board and Conservation Commission and with the town's stormwater consultants to come up with changes that we as a team are recommending to the board. They're summarized in this cover letter that John is showing you, and then we have provided attached to the cover letter a red line version of the bylaw showing the changes that we're recommending to the bylaw. So I think rather than, well, I could walk through the changes if you would like that, but given I think the time window, perhaps the best thing would be for me to just at this point to entertain questions.
Yeah, and so Rebecca, a quick question for you from a process perspective. Is this something that you're looking for us to take a vote on as to whether we support it, or is that not necessary because this will be moving forward via the DPW?
I think that eventually, I think it would be helpful to know that the planning board supports us. When we get to town meeting, the form that it comes, is presented to town meeting. It would be good to know that the planning board supported that, what was being proposed. We certainly don't need to vote tonight, but I think at some point going forward, it would be helpful to have the planning board's endorsement for the purpose of town meeting.
Okay, thank you. And are there other specific questions from the members of the planning board?
Through the chair.
Yes, Sundar.
Yeah, I mean, I think what are the core changes? I mean, could there be a brief synopsis of what the basic changes are, how substantial those are. I don't know how long that's going to take, but if even if it could be a brief synopsis, that would be helpful in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think they highlighted that in the letter, but maybe Rebecca, if you just want to hit on the highlights, and John's showing it now, I think the line items, but maybe if you can just hit on the major ones there.
Yes, absolutely. So let me just step back and say, from a big picture, what the new permit, what EPA wants the town to do is impose kind of more stringent requirements on the developers of these projects, development or redevelopment projects that are disturbing more than an acre. So they are going to be, and EPA has set forth some specific requirements involving both retention of stormwater on site and the water quality benefits that or other ways to reduce pollution and runoff. And another big component of the new requirements is a focus on low impact development, which is something that is part of DEP's stormwater handbook and standards, but is not necessarily a central requirement, and that's now a requirement. So big picture, that's kind of where we're headed. The bylaw changes, but as I said, so the detail of those performance standards will mostly be in the revisions to the regulations, which we'll do once these bylaw changes are hopefully adopted by town meeting and approved by the Attorney General. So the bylaw changes are a little bit miscellaneous because it's sort of tweaking various things just to make sure that there's sufficient applicability and authority to make those changes in the regulations. But so just to kind of briefly characterize them, let's see. So we put in a new definitions section. The regulations have many definitions. So we're just taking some of those and a couple other ones that we think need to be in the bylaw. So we're adding those, suggesting to add those to the bylaw. And then probably the couple most significant sets of changes are we've kind of gone through and really revised the applicability section. The redlining makes it look like there is more revision than there was. Some of it is just kind of rearranging, but the basic big picture is to make sure that all projects that disturbing more than an acre are subject to this permit. There's no longer, with the new EPA permit, there's no longer room to sort of provide different little exemptions for different kinds of activities. So we've revised and reorganized things to make clear that all projects disturbing more than an acre are subject to this bylaw. All construction activity that involves disturbance of land that disturbs more than an acre of land is subject to this bylaw. There are some other things listed that are not construction activity that can be exempted, such as normal agricultural activities. And then let's see, we've just done a little bit of tweaking to the the sections regarding performance standards to incorporate a reference to low impact development and references to the MS4 permit. And then the other major thing we have just added some additional language to the enforcement section, just to make sure that the enforcement authority is broad enough and that some of the specific language that is necessary under state law for the town to carry out enforcement activities is in the bylaw. So those are kind of the big picture groups of types of changes.
Sure. Thank you. That was really useful. Thank you so much.
Are there other questions from the board? Fran.
Through the chair, and this is maybe more directed toward Mr. Westerling. With the revisions that to the bylaw that Rebecca talked about and the more stringent requirements and enforcement of those, is there going to be any impact, John, on your staff and your team in terms of resources and the ability to kind of continue to manage and monitor to these new revisions?
Through the chair, the permit that came out a couple of years ago really has a great impact on our staff and on the tasks that we have to take care of every year. As an example, we typically sweep the streets every year throughout the town in the springtime. The new permit requires us to not only do that sweeping in the spring, but also 50% more of the roads. We have to do them twice. We have to do them in the fall as well. So this is but one small piece of a very complex permit. So we're grateful for the support from folks like Rebecca Lacey over at Meares and Harrington and our engineers Ty and Bond. So that's a long way of saying yes.
Are there other questions?
Through the chair, I have a question.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering if someone can define what low impact development is and how will this help guide us towards using more low impact development?
Through the chair?
Yes, please, Rebecca.
So it's an excellent question, and that term is not defined in the MS4 in the EPA MS4 permit, which I found puzzling because it is a key requirement of the permit. The permit, let's see, specifically, we use the permit language in the suggested bylaw changes. So I just want to try to quote it though. Let's see. Okay, the permit says that the towns must impose upon developers a requirement that low impact development, site planning and design strategies be incorporated unless infeasible in order to reduce the discharge of stormwater. So that's the performance standards provided that we need to impose, is that low impact development strategies must be incorporated unless infeasible. The definition that we are recommending for low impact development is one that kind of combines language that Mass DEP uses regarding low impact development and language that EPA uses regarding low impact development, kind of in various settings, so that it captures both the big picture site design strategies, which this type of thinking takes place even before the project is down on paper. I think folks tend, when they think about stormwater management system design, you think about, where you're going to put your detention basins and how you're going to route your pipes and so forth. But low impact development asks developers to kind of step back and say, okay, where even on the site am I going to locate this building? What features am I going to take advantage of and leave in place because they'll help with stormwater management? So that kind of big picture site design that then reduces the need for for sort of more artificial mechanisms that collect and treat stormwater. And then the other aspect is is to use stormwater management systems modeled after natural hydrologic features to manage rainfall at the source using what EPA calls decentralized microscale controls. And so those are things which folks might be familiar with, like bioretention facilities, rain gardens, vegetated rooftops, rain barrels, permeable pavements. All those things are considered low impact development measures. So those are the strategies, both kind of big picture and then microscale. And the requirement is that they must be incorporated unless infeasible.
All right.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions before I get to my questions? I don't see any. So Rebecca, just, I guess, one question that maybe you can answer and then one that you probably can't answer, but we'll start with the question you can answer. Have other towns already adopted these new stormwater standards? Or is this, I'm just looking for some precedents or something to assess how common this is in other communities.
So in these, in the, whatever it is, 150 or so towns in Massachusetts that are subject to this permit, almost all of them did adopt stormwater management and erosion control bylaws pursuant to the 2003 version of this MS4 permit. The compliance with this requirement, these heightened requirements of the new permit, the deadline for towns to comply with that is this June 30th of 2021. So towns are kind of just just getting around to it. And I would say most towns are, this is going to be coming. I mean, towns that have the town meeting form of government, this is going to be coming before the spring, annual town meeting in the spring. So a number for, most of our the towns that we represent have this on their town meeting warrant. And I think that's generally true kind of across Eastern Massachusetts. A few towns have already, are ahead of the game and have already done this. And a number of towns are kind of behind. So that's kind of where I would say where things stand.
Yeah, and I guess I was just, the question that you probably can't answer is I'm just being thoughtful to the developers in town and people that like, do we have any sense as to what additional costs developers might incur or what impact there might be to people that are wanting to build something?
I'll give, so you're right that this gets outside of my expertise for sure. But I guess something I will say is that this has been in the works for a while. So I think to some extent, developers have known this was coming. EPA put out a draft version of this permit, I think like in 2014, and then the permit actually was originally adopted in 2016, went into effect in 2018, but then it was under litigation, so deadlines got extended and so forth. So these requirements have kind of been on paper, in some form or other since dating back to at least 2014. So I think to some extent developers have factored this in, and the fact that this applies to sites greater than an acre, capture the type of large projects that this captures tend to be the kinds of projects that are, that have thought carefully about stormwater measures. And this is not, a huge new hurdle for them. That said, what I don't know is how significant the changes, the specific increased requirements, like the heightened requirements for how much stormwater needs to be retained on site. I don't have a sense, that's sort of like an engineering question of like, how significant is that in your site design, and does that change, significantly change like what you can put on the site? That I'm not sure about.
Okay, and I know it's a tough question to answer. I just trying to get some sense. So I think what I'm going to propose here, I know this was in our packet, and I think the context is super helpful, but I think what might make sense is for us to all go back and read this in a little bit more detail. If people from the public have thoughts or comments on it, that gives them a little bit of time to process and digest as well. And then maybe at our next meeting, if we can, if you have questions, if you have thoughts, then, ideally, even if you can submit those to us, we can hopefully answer those in the next meeting, and then we can take a vote as to, to assess the planning board's support of it. And I see Mr. Westerling has his hand raised. Mr. Westerling, did you have a final comment to make?
I do, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank the planning board for its time this evening. I think that it'd be very helpful as we get to town meeting to have the planning board support of this. So I am at your ready if you have any questions that you need answered, and we can certainly ask Rebecca Lacey to come back and help us to answer any of the questions that the planning board has. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Does that seem like a fair plan forward? I just don't know if as a group we're quite ready to vote on this. There is some pretty substantial impact there, and just want to make sure that people have time to process and digest. And sounds like if we can bring a vote at the next meeting, that's going to be in more than enough time for town meeting. I see nodding heads, sort of.
Yeah, I'm super comfortable with that, particularly because it's a big change for the public, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Can I? This is Rob. Can I ask one more question about this?
If you want to make us late tonight, sure.
Just, I guess this is be brief, but this is a requirement by the state, and so I don't. The town adopting this seems to be a formality. Like I don't understand. I guess I don't understand what the.
So I can take a shot at that, and Rebecca, correct me for where I fall off here. But the requirement is that the town complies with these new guidelines. The actual details of how we comply to them is where the work is here. So given that towns have different stormwater bylaws and they might interpret things somewhat differently, then we have to adopt these new standards into our bylaws, and that's where the debate could be.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I will say, yes, I agree with that. But I guess I would say the one thing I would add is that in terms of the sort of the ultimate impact on developers and project proponents, that is probably the aspect that the town does not have really any, much control over. Ultimately what matters to developers is things that the town is going to be required to put in there. But the types of things, but on the other hand, how the process works and how clear the bylaw is and all those details, those are the things that, can be tweaked and discussed.
Thank you. Mr. Paradise.
So we have written bylaws for many communities, and what I think is proposed here is kind of the minimum required by the MS4 permit. So there are many flavors in which you could delve in terms of thresholds and stuff like that, but this is pretty straightforward, and like Ms. Lacey said, it's a standard that all engineers are going to understand. There are some communities that have much more strict standards and such, but this is pretty straightforward.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Dave.
So going down the path that Rob was going, and from what I'm hearing from Beta, and maybe we can get a confirmation from the DPW, but it sounds like it's straightforward. And if the DPW doesn't have any issues supporting it, why wouldn't we vote on it tonight?
We certainly could. I think that I'm not sure people read through the details to the context that they might want to. I think that the overview was super helpful, but again, I think this is complex, and I just want to make sure people understand what they're voting on before they vote on it.
Is there a potential to just take a quick straw vote to see whether people have an appetite to vote on it tonight?
Sure. Rob, do you want to vote on this tonight?
I would prefer to reread it, understanding what's fully in our control and what fully isn't.
Muriel?
I appreciate efficiency, but I'm happy to wait just to make sure the public gets a chance to think about it.
Fran?
I'm happy to wait based on the comments or just following up on the comments of Muriel and Rob.
I'm fine with that, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I thought I was supporting Rob, but then he took a U-turn.
Thanks, Dave.
All right.
No problem.
And in the interest of efficiency, what I will ask is that if people have comments or questions, this is in the packet now. Go ahead and review it and submit those questions to myself and John, and we'll go ahead and make sure to have answers to those questions at the next meeting so that we can move this forward quickly, hopefully with minimal discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. So the last administrative item, and I hope this one is quick. I will entertain a motion to approve minutes from February 8th, 2021.
Rob Benson, so moved.
From the Sivaram seconded.
All right. And is there any discussion? And if not, we'll go ahead and vote. Rob, how do you vote?
Rob Benson, yes.
Muriel?
Muriel Kramer, yes.
Jane? Jane, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Deb?
Deb Feinberg, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Subramanian, yes.
Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
And Gary Trundle's a yes. Okay. Let's move forward to Wilson Street, Cedar Street proposed amendment to solar special permit and stormwater management permit. And I think we have the applicant on here. I don't see. Is Mr. King on? See Mr. McGinnis. Who's going to be the
Mr. King is on.
Oh, he is.
Mr.
Oh, there he
Chair.
is. Sorry, was that you, Mr. Hafez?
Yes. Good
Hi.
evening, everyone. Yeah, this is Ahmed Hafez from Grasshopper Energy. I'm here tonight with Chris King from Atlantic, and Grace Russell is my colleague at Grasshopper, and we also have Mr. McGinnis from Rich May, a law firm. So yeah, Chris King should lead this presentation. Chris, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Actually, if we could just hang on one second, because I do want to make sure that we stay focused tonight on the stormwater impact. And, I think that as we've talked about, there's a couple of changes to this amendment. I think we're through those except for the stormwater. And I know there's been some dialogue back and forth between Beta and the applicant. The other thing I just want to hit on up front is that while I know that pollinators are important to us, that is the pollinator requirements are not within our current bylaw on this ground-mounted commercial solar voltaic. So just want to throw that out there. If we can stay focused on the stormwater impact, I think that is the right place for us to focus. And I think we're largely through the other components of these proposed amendments. So, Mr. King, do you want to quickly give us a status update from the last meeting?
Sure, absolutely. Good evening. This is Christopher King with Atlantic Design Engineers on behalf of the applicant. Here this evening to quickly, hopefully succinctly review potential stormwater impacts. As noted, Atlantic has been in correspondence with Mr. Paradis with Beta Group, who initially brought up the concern regarding the viability of seed growth beneath the panels due to the spacing and height of what we're proposing as part of the modification. I think we've come to an impasse, so to speak, where we can both agree to disagree. Where I'm relying on my experts and the client and their experience in successfully growing grass on a project with similar parameters. Mr. Paradis is, we've offered information and it just isn't an exact match, and he hasn't seen it close enough in understanding some of the issues the town has recently had on other projects. He wanted to make sure we were covering all our bases. And so what does the seed growing really mean from a stormwater standpoint? Well, it means the stabilization of the site and the ability of the site to retain sediment and not discharge that into the stormwater management system and then in turn into the wetland. There are other ways to stabilize a site, one of which is to spread gravel. It doesn't sound as magnificent as the pollinator mix that we're proposing, and we stand by, and that is certainly going to be our first option because there are developer incentives, as noted, to go with a pollinator certified site. But in the event that the viability of the seed mix just isn't, what we're promoting it to be, we do have a contingency plan, if you will, for site stabilization. And that's highlighted in the land management plan that Goddard Consulting had prepared and provided. And it basically says that if the seed mix does not take, the areas where it does not take, gravel will be spread as required to provide site stabilization. One of the comments that Mr. Paradis again had made in regards to that is understanding what that means from a stormwater standpoint. So understanding we're talking about a hypothetical situation. We, again, tried to come up with a worst case scenario that came up with a conservative estimate of the impacts to stormwater. And that was basically considering the area underneath and between the panels as poor grass cover, being at 0 to 50% coverage. We reran the numbers considering the areas in their entirety underneath and between the panels as that increased curve number. We submitted those calculations to Mr. Paradis, and they basically demonstrate that the stormwater management system as designed is still adequate to mitigate the slight increase in runoff associated with that conservative estimate or worst case scenario, if you will. The ponds are still sized to provide a foot of freeboard. The pre-development flows, the post-development flows are under the pre-development flows for both the 2 and the 10-year. There's a very immeasurable increase under the 25-year storm that's actually less than a CFS. And under the 100-year storm, where we would anticipate seeing the biggest increase, it's only increasing by 5.6 CFS. I know those are a lot of numbers. What does that mean in the scope of the design point that we're tasked with considering? The 5.6 CFS is only 4% of the total flow going to that point during the 100-year storm. So we feel that's a pretty nominal increase. Another thing that I think it's important to point out that this project includes over 2,500 linear feet of shallow infiltration trenches located throughout the array that are not accounted for in the model right now. And those trenches have been proposed from day one in an effort to promote recharge and really slow down the runoff anticipated from the site in some of the sloped areas. And I think it's reasonable to understand that over 2,500 linear feet of infiltration trenches will certainly provide the 5.6 CFS that would be required to basically bring the project into compliance with the stormwater management policy, even under a worst case scenario. Again, understanding that number is a direct correlation to the amount of gravel we need, which is a direct derivative of where grass is going to grow and where it isn't. I don't think it's warranted to do a full-blown design at this time, but I think we've demonstrated that the design as proposed now is more than adequate, considering kind of the worst-case scenario. I'll let Mr. Paradis fill in any holes I may have left out. I know another concern is the erosion controls, and if I could just remind the planning board that one of the conditions of approval is that we're providing funds so that Beta is going to specifically be inspecting erosion controls throughout construction, understanding we have a D soil, and we feel as a project team we've gone above and beyond where we're not required to. We've called for a double row of erosion controls along the entire perimeter, understanding the sensitivity of this issue, not only for this site, but within the town itself.
So,
so we feel we've demonstrated that we've addressed all the stormwater concerns. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Chris. Mr. Paradise,
yep.
Just wondering if we can get your opinion on this as to whether their proposal conforms with our stormwater standards.
So again, I haven't seen this configuration of arrays and spacing and layout. I have seen many systems that kind of mimic what was originally submitted, providing adequate cover. But as we've learned from both legacy and legacy villages there, and also the trails at Legacy, that soil in that area is very silty and susceptible to being suspended in stormwater runoff or rainfall events. And so we just want to make sure that it's going to grow and or be able to be maintained. The problem, I just want to give the developer heads up, because there's very little space between the aisles to get any kind of mechanical equipment to be able to spread or fix the problem. So, there's alternatives to making sure that's stable. I think that some of the examples they gave are a little bit misleading, but I'm not by far not a grass expert or that. the stormwater, as it pertains to stormwater runoff itself, provided that there is not a inundation of these swales. The stone swales are a very good addition to the system, as long as they don't get filled up with sediment themselves and becoming ineffective quickly. So I think the plan that they have is to mitigate any kind of lack of growth of grasses with stone, which I think would be difficult with all the panels up, but that is an option. One of the options I recommended was possibly putting down an erosion control matting before you put the panels down, would allow the grass seed to grow through and stabilize it as it goes. But they prefer not to have that option. So again, they provided assurances that it can grow. And, I'm not sure that we should wait 5 growing seasons before we mitigate or put in the alternative solution. So.
Yeah. So question for you, Phil, on the contingency plan of using gravel or crushed stone, in your professional opinion, does that mitigate, or if they were to use that crushed stone, does that address the stormwater issues or concerns that you have?
I'm not sure. In this type of soil, I don't know how thick it would need to be able to do that, but because we've seen it, the contractors struggle with the other 2 sites there nearby that they had to make sediment ponds and use flock logs and stuff like that just to get the sediment to settle out. I think it's I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it being used in this kind of situation. If you had put down a blanket first and then done the systems, that may be a better solution. But
so I guess my question back to the applicant is, we have the idea of an erosion control mat before installation. Sounds like a solution that our town engineer would be comfortable with, but it sounds like that's not an option for you. And I'm sure that there's some additional cost associated with that, but personally anyways, any other reasons as to why not move forward with that recommendation from Beta?
Yes, this is Mitch Maslenka with Goddard Consulting. I'm a wetland scientist, and I put together that array footprint management plan. The issue with the mat is if we put the mat down over the grass seed will be exposed to, even less potential light getting under there. And just, that alone might be the thing that makes the grass not able to grow beneath the solar panels. So that's why we shied away from that option. And also I looked into erosion control mats just to put down, no grass proposed at all, just a mat. I could only find some that degraded within 10 years and needed a replacement. So we also shied away from that option as well, because that would require us to, still go in there and do maintenance every 10 years to maintain the mats and such. So that's the reason.
Okay. Questions from the board, Jane?
Sure. So are we talking about flatlands or these slopes? What's the degree of steepness in these areas? Is that part of the problem as well?
Mr. King?
So the slopes throughout the site vary. There are some slopes that are, closer to say 15% and there are some, pretty gentle slopes. When we had initially, when this issue initially came up, we had talked about all the alternatives with Beta, and like Mitch with Goddard had brought up, the erosion control matting was looked into, and we thought it, may interfere with the seed growth. But if that's something that the town would be looking for to follow the lead of their engineer, I think that the matting could be an appropriate solution, particularly for some of the sloped areas. Maybe in excess of 5% or something like that. But I don't think that we would need it in the relatively shallow areas. And then, one more thing was brought up in regards to the intermediate infiltration trenches throughout the array. We do have a detail requiring those trenches be basically overlapped with filter fabric during construction to prevent the siltation that Mr. Paradise was referencing. And once the site is stabilized, that fabric is to be cut away and removed so that they can intend to function sediment-free as designed.
Right. Are there other questions?
I don't know if
Just one.
and
Go ahead, Jane.
Okay.
Is there a type of pollinator or grass or wildflowers or something that would do well in a gravel if you had to go with the gravel as a last resort? I know there are all kinds of plants that do grow in gravel. Have you looked into that?
Mitch might be able to. Yeah, go ahead, Mitch.
Yeah, I didn't really look into that. I'm not sure if these ones do grow well in gravel, but I could look into that and get a solid answer. I know they do well in dry conditions. So, that's
Can
one.
I ask a practical question? If for all the soil that's underneath the panels, how do they get any water to them at all? I mean, at the end of the day, you've basically got a roof over it. And I'm not a environmental scientist, but I know that plants require moisture and water and some degree of sunlight to grow. And if it's completely undercover.
Yep. So there's humidity in the air, and they can be able to transpire water that way, taking it in through leaves and morning dew. They'll be able to take it in over time. So there are ways for plants to obtain moisture, even when there's not a clear, direct path for the water to get to them.
Yeah. All right, Fran?
Yeah, I'm just trying to look for a solution here through the chair that, Phil, based on, some of the potential suggestions that, I'm hearing tonight from Mr. King and a few others, is there a, I don't say happy medium, but is there a place that you would find some degree of comfort, either a combination of the mats where there is more than 5 degrees of slope, because I know some of the abutters on Wilson Street, that would be a concern. And then those more flat areas, you would not necessarily need the mats, and you would go with the seed mix. I'm just trying to work through it here.
Through the chair, I sort of have a comment, sort of, if I could jump in for just a quick second. One of the things that I had thought of is there's a wide range of different kinds of grids and matting for soil stabilization. I'm just wondering, it's just not one type. So I'm just wondering if they could come back to us with a plan, as Fran had suggested, for having an appropriate mat that would go underneath it, that would allow light in, or what the plants would need to be nurtured underneath, and yet retain the soils.
Yep. So I'm going to go back to Fran's question for Mr. Paradise. Mr. Paradise, is there, and I feel bad. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that we like to work out before we get to this point. And I know there's been some back and forth discussion this week to to Mr. King's point earlier, we are kind of at an impasse here. So, you know, I think at the end of the day, I think that I'm speaking for myself, but I lean very heavily on our expert opinion from Beta. So, you know, Phil, is there a solution here that both you and the applicant could get comfortable with?
Yeah, I think the option to look at the individual areas, you know, there is at least one area that's fairly steep, but the other areas may be less susceptible to rapid, rapid velocities of water. There may be opportunities to provide in drip edges for the edge for making sure that water isn't concentrated in particular areas or whatever. So maybe providing some BMPs for that to that effect. So I think you know, considering the different areas and seeing what would be best in each of the different areas.
Yeah,
it's definitely doable.
So going back to the applicant, and I think it's going to be hard for us to design this tonight. You know, I think what my ask would be to work with Beta to come up with a solution that effectively addresses his concerns that he's willing to endorse. And when we have that, then, you know, to me, I think that makes the most sense, and then we can, you know, carry on through the rest of the process.
If I can just say something before the applicant responds. Some of these issues, as far as the sloping and different things like that, there was a stormwater permit that was granted already, and some of these issues I think were already presented and approved on. I know there's a different array and they've made a modification, but it seems like we're getting into areas that should have already been discussed in the previous.
Yep. You know what, Mr. McGinnis, we did discuss these previously, and we have a approved commercial solar plan.
Right.
And if the applicant would like to, they can go back to that existing plan and build it out as it's been approved previously. So we rely on our expert testimonial here. Hang on a second. We rely on our expert testimonial here.
You just let me finish though, because you cut me off. What I'm saying is, if some of these things that you're asking would apply to the old plan as well, then you're bringing up something that should have been brought up already. If it applies directly to a change that happened, that would make sense. But if it applies to something that was already a consideration under the previous plan, I'm not sure why it's being reopened.
Yeah,
but I'll let the applicant respond to it.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Chris King again with Atlantic Design. If I could kind of reel it back in here, as you know, based on our request when the modification was originally submitted, time is of the essence here. We've thankfully worked with the commission to then allow us to start land clearing activities. You know, I think from what I'm hearing tonight, just about from every member, is they want to, you know, get from Mr. Paradis that he, you know, can endorse, you know, a plan moving forward. And I think that there are options out there. I think it is feasible. And in the interest of time, and the confidence in some of the solutions available, and some, I think, of the productive discussion that took place this evening regarding maybe some matting in some of the sloped areas, I would offer that, you know, I think, unless Mr. Paradis disagrees, I think this is something we could easily finalize very quickly. It's something that could be a condition of approval of the modification, that the you know, the final stabilization plan be reviewed and approved by the Beta group. And we could give them a figure showing the areas we're thinking about putting the matting and additional BMPs that Mr. Paradis has referenced. That would allow the planning board hopefully to be in a position to vote this evening, understanding that that allows us really to move into our next phase and to submit for the building permit. And that is going to take some time as well. And so that, you know, the caveat would be that building permit wouldn't be granted until this is worked out with Mr. Paradis. Again, you know, we're appearing before the Conservation Commission next week. It was made very clear by the commission that this is within their jurisdiction as well. And so we're not going to get a handle on this in 5 years. We're going to get a handle on it first when we finish construction, and we need Mr. Paradise's sign off that the site was built and stabilized in accordance with what was approved. And if it isn't at that point in time, we're going to know. And that's going to be, you know, pretty close to after construction. And then when we go for the certificate of compliance for the commission, roughly at the 2 or 3 year mark, whatever's most appropriate, that would be the next instance where that would be evaluated by the commission's peer reviewer. So, you know, I think that there are multiple levels or mechanisms in place, mechanisms of enforcement. And, you know, again, you know, I know it's not onus on the board, but really, you know, a benefit to the applicant would be to be able to have the board maybe adopt a condition of approval that would allow Mr. Paradis to review something that had, you know, give us time then to look into a matting that is most conducive to seed growth and propose that and provide the spec sheet to Mr. Paradis as well, with just a quick map showing the areas greater than 5% and the areas where we're thinking about implementing the matting, and come to agreements on that. Again, allowing us to move forward with the planning board, hopefully this evening, and on to the next phase.
Yeah. So let me look to the board and see, just want to get a general sense. How do people feel about potentially conditioning this, you know, on Beta's review and approval of their broader stormwater management plan with these revised panels? Muriel?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me, thank you. The only thing that I'm very comfortable relying on Beta's recommendation. I'm a little less comfortable with gravel being the option. I don't think we ever talked about that or conceived of that. We always wanted it to be seeded and be, you know, a pollinator friendly field. So I'm a little concerned about the fallback being approved as gravel.
Okay. Other thoughts on conditioning Beta's review, Jane?
I'm comfortable if Phil is comfortable with it. And I do feel if they did investigate pollinators and other seeds that could grow in gravel, that might be an option in some places, preferably not in all of it, but hopefully some sort of flexible project plan could come forward if they're working with Phil. I think Phil has a good handle on what the planning board is looking for.
And, you know, before I get to other folks, I should probably just defer to Phil. Phil, I know we're putting a lot of weight on your shoulders tonight, but you know, what are your thoughts on conditioning approval around you know, addressing these stormwater issues?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. If that's the preference of the board, I just want to make sure it works, and you know, we can get on with the project. So I don't want to have, you know, repeat the headaches that we had prior. So I've seen plenty of solar arrays be built and work, you know, and I just want to make sure this one works as well. So,
Fran?
Yeah. So through the chair, and you know, and thanks, Phil. I like other members here defer and value the perspective and opinion of Beta. I think they've done a wonderful job for us over the years. Here, just given the concerns that have been raised already, I do have a little hesitation about, you know, conditioning the approval. I think it puts a lot of weight on coming up with a solution that, quite frankly, should have been identified and addressed prior to this meeting. So it only now puts then more onus just to get something approved, because, you know, the applicant's now moving forward and they've got a time deadline. Well, you know, the time deadline of the applicant may or may not align with what is in the best interest of the town. And that's not necessarily to say that we don't want to, and we're doing anything to not move this forward. I think we all want to try to do it in a positive and constructive way. And if Phil is okay with potentially conditioning it, I guess we'd look that way, but I still have some concerns about, you know, conditioning the approval moving forward.
Mr. Hafez, I'll get to you in a second, but are there any other thoughts from the board on conditioning this? Dave?
Yes, so I'm okay with conditioning it, but I just wanted to point out that I'm kind of against the gravel approach too. In my opinion, if you can't get natural vegetation to grow, then perhaps there shouldn't be a solar panel there.
Mr. Hafez. Oh, sorry, Rob.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts are things that should be done by a certain time should be done by a certain time. That's how I look at it. And not having this worked out prior to this meeting is not what we as members of the planning board are looking for. I would prefer, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I would prefer that it was just done and we could say yes, go ahead and give the approval of a yes vote. But timelines matter, and it should have been done. That's my opinion.
All right. Any other comments from the board? All right, Mr. Hafez. Sorry for the delay
no
there.
problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to respond to some of the comments from the members of the board, and I understand your concern, I just want to bring everyone's attention that we're discussing the hypothetical situation in case our plan does not work. So we're not planning to put gravel, we're not planning to leave it bare, we're planning to have vegetation under the panels. Water can get through the panels. The panels are not like blocking the access to the soil. There are gaps between the panels and there are gaps between one table and another. So water will get under the panels. And just want to express my reservation on a comment or description of Mr. Paradis of the information we've provided. It wasn't exactly as what our site is like now. It's like we've presented pictures from our vendors, our vegetation vendors, or like landscape vendors that show narrow row spacing as we have, and we've presented pictures of modules that are close to the ground. But they were not typically like, they were not exactly like what we have on site, because it's very hard to find two projects with exactly the same configuration and exactly the same row spacing and exactly the same design. So this is why they were not exactly the same, and I agree with Mr. Paradis on that, but we're not trying to mislead the beta group or the board. We did all we can to get similar pictures of similar situations, and that's what the vendors had sent us. So to respond to the concerns of the planning board, we are planning to have vegetation. We are applying for the pollinator adder as we have said before, and we have used the expertise of Goddard Consulting to design a seed mix that will grow in the shade and under the panels. They have the experience to do that. And then all what we're trying to solve for, or all what we're trying to answer now, is what if this doesn't work? And it's like we've hired the engineers to design a building, and then like there is a comment on, okay, what if the building or design is not correct? What's your contingency plan? And this is what we're answering for now. But our plan is to have vegetation under the modules. Our plan is not to have gravel unless it's necessary as a contingency plan. So that's what I wanted to say and give comfort to everyone that we will do everything we can to have vegetation. And we believe that we have the correct design for that, and there will be vegetation under the panels. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hafez. I think the challenge we run into is that our engineers are not as confident as your group that vegetation will grow and that stormwater will be managed. So no offense, but that's why we have an independent, that's why we have our engineer review it. And I think that's why many of us have some caution here.
And
Miriam?
Yeah, I just want to be very clear. I'm not talking, I understand you have to have contingency plans and hypotheticals. I just want to make sure that I express that gravel is not an acceptable alternative to growth. So it's not a contingency plan in my estimation. We have to make sure that we are able to seed and grow and have growth under those panels. And if the applicant is willing to take gravel off the table and work really hard as a contingency plan to make sure that there is a pollinator mix and a seed mix under there, then I have more comfort.
So is there a contingency plan that doesn't involve gravel?
So in the array footprint management plan, it's all we included was the gravel option, but I could amend that to, make it say the, matting on greater than 5% slopes. And I could make it so it's, make it so it works with beta.
Okay. All right. Sounds like we've got a general willingness of the board to move forward with a condition around the stormwater issue. And actually, sorry, before we go forward, I know Mr. Barker Hook has had his hand raised for a little while. So Mr. Barker Hook, if you don't mind, just state your name and address.
Of course. Hi, I'm Ted Barker Hook. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I live at 75 Grove Street. I'm also a member of the Conservation Commission, and we heard about the solar panels as well. I'll just point out, although it's our environmental engineer was also concerned about the viability of vegetation under the panels. But my bigger comment is, I hope that the planning board will consider precedent that may be set if this is approved or approved on contingency. It seems the root issue is the density of solar panels. And if this project gets approved, that tells future solar developers, hey, we can put more solar panels in X amount of square feet. It got approved with this other one. And that is the root question we're getting to, is whether this density of panels works. And our town engineers suggest, no, we fear that the vegetation will not grow. We're going to have water runoff issues. My second comment or question is, given that this issue has been raised, if there's still time, I wonder if the planning board would consider looking at the new proposed solar development bylaw and consider whether there ought to be a space in there for the spacing of solar panels in future proposed developments. And that's what I got for tonight.
All right. Thank you, Ted. Any further comments from the board or from the public on this? Okay. So let's go ahead and move forward here. There are not any requested waivers, so that's relatively straightforward. As we look at the decision criteria, the decision criteria listed as such: the commercial solar photovoltaic installation conforms to the provisions of this article. The installation will not be detrimental to the neighborhood or town, and that environmental features of the site and surrounding areas are protected, and specifically surrounding areas will be protected from the proposed use by provision of adequate surface water drainage. So we'll pause there because I think that last one is an important one that that we want to align around. Any thoughts from the board? What I'm hearing is that if we, yeah, go ahead, Fran.
Mr. Chair, I'm hearing some ideas thrown out tonight, but I don't hear any, maybe I just haven't heard a definitive plan from the applicant that's been kind of, I would say, approved by Beta that we would feel comfortable going forward. It seems like the cart being put before the horse. Some things are being talked about, like, yes, assuming that we'll do this, we'll align it to this, and then it'll work with Beta. And at this point, Beta, we're assuming, is going to approve the conditional criteria that we've identified here. So I just, given the history around the surrounding areas with the concerns about the soil quality, well, I would just want to pump the brakes on this one a little bit until Beta is fully reviewed the plan that the applicant has put in place, and that we feel that we've had time to review it, and Phil and his team have had adequate time to review the proposal.
Yeah. Thanks, Fran. I'll just share my thoughts. Fran, I agree with you. And while I appreciate the desire to move quickly here, you know, this original application was approved several years ago. We discussed it. We knew that stormwater issue was going to be a concern 2 weeks ago. And while I'm generally amenable to the idea of using a condition for something minor, to me, the stormwater management is at the crux of what we're evaluating here. And at least from what I've gathered, it seems like the density of the solar panels could have a pretty substantial impact on that. And that's leaning very heavily on the advice of our engineer. So, I think from a process moving forward here, if the applicant wants, we can continue to go through the process, and we can put forth a condition by which which we can use to carry this forward as a vote. Personally, that's something that I'd have a hard time supporting, and I'd feel a whole lot more comfortable for the details of this to be worked out between the applicants and our engineer. Muriel?
Yeah, I'm just going to weigh in the affirmative with both of you. We're very fine moving forward with speed and alacrity, but it's up to the applicant to come prepared with a plan we can act on that's definitive, that our engineers have had a chance. And I will say our engineers are very, very prompt and very professional about reviewing information quickly. So if speed is of the essence, leverage that within the town of Hopkinton. Our professional staff is very willing to work really quickly and come prepared.
Mr. Hafez?
Mr. Chair, thank you. We will work with Beta. The reason why this came to this discussion seemingly unprepared like this is that we received comments on this from Beta Group, and I understand they've been working on it, but we received comments on Thursday late in the afternoon. So this is why we put together, we did all the calculations and everything, and we submitted it to them as soon as we could. But we agree to, like, we want the site to be stable. We don't want issues in the future. So we'll work with Beta to get to a solution that like the board would be comfortable with and Beta would be comfortable with. Like like I said, we are okay to work with any contingency plan that would be proposed by Beta, and like we're not opposed to that. We won't, and this will not be. It's not like if you vote today, tomorrow we'll start with something that would affect that being done. This will be applied towards the end of the project, so it's not. And as Chris King said, there are so many like checkpoints where you can control this. It's not that it will be left for 3 years or something, and for you to find out that, oh, it wasn't done or something. So no, it's we are very willing to work with Beta and with the planning board to come to a solution that everyone would be comfortable with.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And again, just, we've had other stormwater issues in that part of town that have been very problematic for us that we've had to go back and address. So that's where a lot of our sensitivity comes from.
And we don't want that. So we're very happy to work with you to make sure that you don't have any concerns or anything about our plan.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So it sounds like there's a little bit of homework for the applicant to work with Beta. I think in general, we certainly haven't taken everyone's temperature on this, but I think there's a preference for us to try and avoid gravel as a contingency plan if we can. And it sounds like there are some other contingency plans that might work beyond gravel. So, hopefully to your point, the pollinators take, but if we can, if you can work with Beta to come to an agreement on this, then I think this would probably be pretty. This will be pretty straightforward for us at our next meeting. So I will. On that note, I'll entertain a motion to. Is 2 weeks from now on March 29th okay with the applicant?
So I thought that we were going to vote on to add a condition for Beta to approve the contingency plan, or we'll vote to approve the change with the condition.
I think what we just heard, at least from several of us, is that we're not comfortable moving forward with the condition at this time. So I thought you were just saying that you were going to go back and work with Beta to come to an agreement. Is that not what you're saying?
Yes, I was saying that we will work with Beta to fulfill that condition, and you can like hold the building permit as Chris King has suggested until this is approved by Beta, but there are so many other checkpoints like.
Just to add to what Ahmed is saying is that I think when he's saying checkpoints is that, there's got to be, the Concom has to review it. There's an order of conditions, special permit has to be complied with. So when those different inspection checkpoints are hit and they go and they look at, well, the vegetation didn't take or it isn't proper, we're not signing off on your permit. So there are many more opportunities to check this down the line, I think is what Ahmed's saying, and suggesting that the condition won't be an issue because there'll be so many more times that you'll be able to review the site and either grant or deny any sign off and any final permit before anything is.
Yeah, well, not necessarily for the planning board, but for me, this is not far enough along down the design phase to where I'm willing to support a condition for it. That's my personal take, and like I said, we can keep that moving forward. If you like, we'll have to move pretty quickly because we do have to stay on somewhat of a schedule tonight. So it's up to you as to whether you'd like to just pull back now and continue and work offline, or we can put together a quick condition and go through the process and take a vote. But I honestly, I couldn't tell you if there would be support from the broader board to move forward with a condition here or not.
Yeah. Well, obviously we don't want it to be, but we'd rather, keep things in play. But the 2-week delay will, as noted, cause an issue. And I understand the concern that people say it should be kept on the schedule. And I think there's a little bit of a feeling, not putting blame on anyone, that the goalpost keeps getting moved a little bit each time. So,
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean by that. What goalposts have moved?
Well, I think like Ahmed was saying, the review comes in, we want these things. And so they respond to it, but then we come to the meeting and then something else is asked for, I think.
What else was asked for?
The matting and different things like that. So so to say that we came unprepared, I understand that feeling, but we prepared as to what was given to us from the board from the last meeting. We prepared, we got with the environmental specialist and the contingency plan and different things. So again, I'm not placing blame on anyone but it just feels like it keeps, like if we come now with another plan and then we come to the next meeting, there might be a new issue raised and then it will get pushed.
So at the last meeting, stormwater impact from the panels was a concern.
Right.
We raised that as a concern. There was not resolution between the town engineer and the applicant between 2 weeks ago and today. And so that's still an issue. So in my opinion, the goalposts have not moved there. And I'm not sure what you're referring to that's different or changed. So, yeah.
Well, I think it's just the response. We didn't get the response until tonight as to the proposal. That's the only issue. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying it's just, but I think, we do want the process to go forward. So if you feel that there's not going to be support for, for a vote, then, we could push it.
Okay. So that's up to you. Like I said, we can go forward with the process and we can try to condition this and see how it goes. The risk is that it doesn't go through on the vote. Like I said, to me, 2 weeks in the grand scheme of things is worth it to be confident that there's a resolution here. But I'm going to leave that up to you as to whether we continue now or whether we move forward in the process.
I would think we continue. Ahmed, would you agree?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So,
All
so
right.
no vote on it. We'll continue to work with you guys and we'll come back in 2 weeks. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So on that note, I will entertain a motion to continue this public hearing to March 29th.
So moved.
Rob Benson, second.
All right. And assuming no further discussion, we
Through the
will.
chair, discussion
Yes.
On that point, the stormwater management permit has a decision deadline of March 25th, which would be before the next meeting. So we would need the applicant to agree to a continuation. Usually we do 14 days after the hearing.
Okay. So then in that case, I'll entertain a motion to continue the public hearing to March 29th and the decision by, I guess that would be
April 13th, April 12th.
So moved.
Yep.
And I just want to make sure the applicant is comfortable with that change.
Yeah, Mr. Gelsich, can you repeat that, please? I'm not following. Can you say that again, please? Sorry.
Yeah, so decisions, so the board can meet and make a decision and vote on the decision at a hearing, but the actual written decision has a deadline of when it needs to be filed with the town clerk. We usually budget about 14 days for that to be written because they're not, sometimes they can be complex. I usually get them done relatively quickly in a matter of days, but just for safety's sake, 14 days is usually what we ask for. So if the board voted to approve the special permit and the stormwater management permit on the 29th, we would have until April 12th to actually have the decision filed with the town clerk.
So,
Okay.
John, would you be comfortable if we shorten that to 7 days after the public hearing?
That's fine.
Okay, we're good with that. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Gelsich. Thank you.
All right, so we have a motion, we have a second. Sorry, the motion would be continue the public hearing to March 29th with the decision deadline by, I guess that would be April 5th. We have a motion, we have a second. We can vote. Rob, how do you vote?
Rob Benson, yes.
Muriel?
Muriel Kramer, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Deb?
Deb Feinberg, yes.
Sundar?
Raman, yes.
Fran?
Fran DeYoung, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes as well. So appreciate your patience. I know that's frustrating to you guys, but I think this is a much cleaner way forward, and look forward to seeing the revised proposal and contingency in 2 weeks. So
Thank you for your time on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving forward to the continued public hearings. In the way we've got these set up is we actually have two separate public hearings for a zoning bylaw and for a general bylaw. What I'm going to propose is that because the language is effectively very similar across both of these, that we talk about them as a group. So maybe at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Mary, who can, and she's kindly prepared some an additional piece of information that summarizes this bylaw language. So, John, are you able to share that on the screen? And Mary, the floor is yours. And you're muted, Mary.
Well, then I wouldn't get very far. Okay. So, do you have that up? I have my own version up here so I can scroll. All right. The proposed bylaw that we're discussing, it will be either a general bylaw or a zoning bylaw, but the wording will be the same other than numbering and stuff like that. So it is simply a matter of, I think, the last point of discussion that planning board can decide whether or not it would be a general or a zoning bylaw. The reason we are moving forward, or we have brought this forward from the Zoning Advisory Committee, is because during the discussion of the solar construction, commercial solar bylaw, and the concerns about some of those developments, we were working to protect the clear cutting of trees so that solar development and other developments did not result in large swaths of trees being cut in Hopkinton. However, we got very clear instructions and recommendations from town council that any restriction on cutting trees cannot be specific to solar. And in fact, although all of our recent examples of concerns we have with clear cutting are solar, we certainly wanted to look at this from a more town-wide and development-wide type of viewpoint. So we are addressing the concerns of town residents, and town council suggested that we take this route as a companion bylaw for the solar bylaw. And they went ahead and drafted an initial draft for us to use for discussion. We've made lots of changes to it since then, but we did get some initial good guidance from town council on this. So there's concern about particularly large developments that may happen in residential and agricultural areas of town that clear cut old growth trees. During the whole process of reviewing this bylaw, this proposed bylaw, I should say, one of the things that we kept in mind was we don't want to impose a large extra workload on town staff or on developers who are legitimately trying to just develop, a reasonable building process in town that they've done for years. So I don't know whether or not we've achieved that goal, but that was our purpose involved in that. So, okay, so I wanted to break down some very basics on this bylaw because the wording can get convoluted, but most importantly, the exemptions. So no permit is required. Nobody in the exemptions list has to worry about this tree cutting bylaw at all. Any site that's less than or equal to 1 acre. Any residential property that's an individual parcel used for a 1-family or 2-family home. That's how we have it worded right now. And any developments that use the open space land preservation development bylaw would not have to worry about this additional bylaw. Also, any agricultural use on any zone, the removal of any dead or diseased or hazardous trees and tree limbs wouldn't trigger this bylaw. And public work on streets, sidewalks, utilities, and trails would also not need to comply with this bylaw. There's a few additional categories that are very specific areas that are in the bylaw. And just wanted to point out that this is included in the definition bylaw that any trees that are less than 3 inches in diameter, that's the diameter of breast height of the trunk, those would not apply either. So any cutting of trees.
We can't hear you.
Yes?
Oh, maybe that was just me. I just got a note that said my internet connection is unstable. Sorry.
No, it was me as well.
Oh, I did too.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let's hope it doesn't die.
Yep, you're back.
Okay. So one of the biggest issues that we discussed for a great deal of time, and I do appreciate all the public who attended and made comments and suggestions along the way at the Zoning Advisory Committee, was how to calculate tree coverage and the removal of trees. So some of the things that we considered and ultimately rejected for various reasons. So a tree canopy coverage. So that's what the leaves shade on the ground, obviously. The lot area at the ground level. So it's kind of the way we often think about, well, we're clearing a lot, you're going to clear 50% of the lot. So that would be the lot area, or a percent clearance of the lot area. Thinking about the density of trees or the number of trees and basing it on, you can cut half the trees. But we felt like, older and larger trees really make more sense because they're more valuable, more to the environment and to aesthetic reasons. So, and then we tried some combination of the above, and all were problematic in various ways. And ultimately, we did find a measurement called basal area that is a measurement that combines the size in terms of the cross-sectional area of tree trunks and the number of trees into a single unit. And it's a square feet of basal area per acre. That's the unit that is used for that measurement. So if half of a site is wooded with 50 square feet per acre of trees and half of the site is not wooded, then the basal area for the entire site would be 25 square feet per acre in basal area. That's just an example. It's hard to visualize right at first. I put an example of on 1 acre, 5 trees. So if you have a 1 acre lot and there's only 5 trees and they each have 20-inch diameter tree trunks, that is equal to 10 square feet per acre of basal area. So there are charts that are available in an article that we used and reference in this since bylaw from the Alabama Cooperative Extension System. There's charts that give a lot of those examples. And this measurement really seemed to capture a lot of the things that we're trying to do. It's measuring what's important to the town. So the bigger trees are give you a larger basal area, and that's what we're interested in. Smaller trees give less basal area. So you can have a lot of smaller trees that would add up to one bigger tree. And that makes a lot of sense in the way you think about what's the value of these trees on this property. So it's a well understood measure in forestry management. The con is that it's not really as easily understood by the rest of us. But I would say that is true in a lot of measurements that we use within zoning. So our proposal within the bylaw is that the tree cutting for development is based on basal area of trees on a subject site. So if the subject site starts with X square feet per acre of basal area, then the applicant is allowed to clear a certain percentage. And the percentages, again, that are proposed within the bylaw and that are up for discussion is 20% cutting of the basal area of trees that exist on the site at the beginning. 20% can be cut in the residential zones and agricultural zone, and 70% in the industrial and business professional office zones. I can go into the rationale that we discussed in Zach if that is of interest to people. In addition, within the bylaw, we said, or an applicant would be allowed to clear greater than the above percentages in basal area if the applicant replants trees elsewhere. And this would be at the discretion of the planning board. So that's essentially what the bylaw says. It would be really helpful for the comments that are provided tonight, both from the board and from the public, is that if you have very specific concerns about a particular section, do you have any suggestions of how to improve it? Or do you just perhaps are just in favor or opposed to the entire concept of the bylaw? So that's what I'm really interested to hear, because we can make improvements to the bylaw, or obviously we can vote on it one way or the other.
And real quick, Mary, just so that people know from a process perspective. So this proposal is so Zach, which really went through and flushed out the details of this. They voted to move this forward to the planning board, both as a zoning bylaw and a general bylaw. So if it does move forward, we'll have to decide which one we think is most applicable. Now that it's the planning board has previously voted to have a placeholder in the town meeting warrant for these. And at this point, as a planning board, we have the opportunity to refine or adjust the language in this prior to taking a vote as to the actual verbiage that we would move forward to town meeting. So this is very much still in the creation process. We try to lean heavily, and Zach has had a lot of discussion. There's been a lot of work with town council on it, but I just want to make sure people realize that this is not a yay or nay decision. We have the ability to change it before we take a vote on it. So that's the purpose of this public hearing, is to get the planning board's reaction to it, as well as the public on the proposal. So what we'll do just from a process perspective is we'll go ahead and take comments and questions from the board first, and then we'll go ahead and open it up to the public for those that would like to ask a question or make a comment about it. So I'll open up to the board. Are there folks that anybody want to go first?
I will.
Yes, Deb.
So Mary, I'm wondering if you can put up on the screen the graphic image you have for the description of basil. I think it's very helpful.
Let's see if John can pull that up.
John's working his magic. And just for the public really quick too, the basil area is a common term in forestry. It's typically used to calculate the timber harvest or the board feet total within a lot. So yeah, it's not something that is sort of, it's a very common term, although I realize it might be a little initially confusing to folks. So sorry, Deb, go ahead.
So I want to speak in favor of this. We own a property in Maine, and I learned this. It was a learning curve for me as well. And this is how they regulate my property. So Maine being a forefront of the environmental protection concerns and having mass forests to work with, uses this on their waterfront as a method of keeping homes screened and healthy, so that they don't become wind tunnels for tornadoes and for hurricanes. So in that light, I just wanted to bring the images forward, so that I think with understanding the girth of the tree, I'm not sure that's the technical term, but I think it describes that the value of the tree and the health of the tree is managed by these terms in forestry. And it's been incredibly healthy for my property as well. So I just want to say that it is a common term. It is something that is regulated elsewhere in other states. And I speak in favor of it, and it's a great education. I really thank Mary for bringing it, Mary and Zach for bringing it forward as a method.
All right, thanks, Deb. Rob?
So I'm trying to think of this as in real world scenarios. So if there was these projects that came before us, if a 10-acre school was proposed and the land was in residential land, the 10 acres could not be cleared by this with this bylaw in place in its entirety. Correct?
Okay, first of all, if it's a school, yes, we didn't specifically put in town projects, public projects as an exemption. But those could or could not, they could be added by planning board as an exemption. So if it's a different type of building, not a school, so would there be some restriction on the amount of trees that could be cut? Yes. Or but it really depends, is the property already half deforested? So it's based on the calculation of what trees are there right now.
Okay.
And how many of those would be cut?
All right. Can I go through just two more examples here? And then we have several A&Rs that come before us. So lots of land, typically with no homes, above an acre. For the sake of the basal calculation, assume it's completely forested, 100%. I don't fully understand the basal calculation. And it's in a residential zone. So that A&R would only effectively be able to clear 20%, that lot would only be able to effectively clear 20% if it's over an acre?
If this is for a personal individual lot that's for, as you say, an A&R is usually a single family home, right?
Yep.
A single family home is exempt.
But the home doesn't exist yet. So
It's still exempt. The way we've written it, it's exempt.
All right. And then say there's just private business, like to use a specific example, we have a Paul Mastriani's project on South Street that went before the planning board. I think that was 11 acres, very wooded. And that would fall into this criteria where it's industrial. So I don't know the tree density, but say it's fully forested. And so he'd be able to clear 70% of that parcel.
Yes, of that basal area. Yes.
Okay.
So essentially it's providing an incentive to preserve the larger trees, assuming they're healthy, of course, and cut smaller trees, because the basal area, for instance, it gives you a lot more basal area with a big tree. So, and 70%, we felt that, although, the exact number can be argued, of course, that generally provides enough of an industrial A lot or something like that, with simply trees along the buffer zones, which are normally going to be retained anyhow. So that particular project that you're referring to for that new building on South Street, I believe it would comply completely with the 70% basal area.
I think it would too, just thinking about it. Okay, thank you. That was my questions.
Sure.
Fran?
So, Mary, thank you for you and Zach for putting this together. I know there's a lot of time and effort spent by yourself and members and town council and the group in general. So just a couple of thoughts. Did we consider any other exemptions to or from the bylaw? And if so, if you can maybe just share what may have been considered or not considered. And then the second thing is, and you alluded to it a little bit, around the proposed percentages, the 20% residential and 70% for industrial business. Were they calculation behind it? Just the method to the madness, a little bit on that, if you could.
So we did consider other exemptions. And actually, some of the exemptions right now might not even be necessary since single family homes and 1 acre or less are exempt already. But things like non-commercial tree cutting for fuel for residential use. So that would be on somebody's, individual property. But we left it in there just for clarity that somebody could could certainly cut a tree for fuel for their fireplace. But they would be exempt anyhow on an individual parcel with a single family home or intending to build a single family home. We considered exempting all town public construction, like schools, for instance. And we decided not to put it on there. I think it was primarily because we thought the discussion should take place with the planning board in terms of the options to retain trees, and there should be, you know, some consideration for that. I still think that, you know, there could be more leniency given on the town public type of constructions. So that might be something that we would want to add in, is a little bit more leeway for that. I can't think of any other specific exemptions we were talking about, but John, if you remember any, you can jump in. And then the percentages. So we talked about this a lot. And you know, 20% versus 25 or 30, 70% versus 80% or 75 or something like that. We certainly don't have rationale to, you know, not adjust it 5% one way or the other. In terms of how solar developments in recent years have used property, and what that resulted in looking like, you know, from just a layperson's point of view, of looking at the clear cutting of a particular lot. And so we did look at those in terms of what percentage of that property was cleared to do solar. And in many cases of the most recent approvals, the clearance area, or the, and you know, this is not based on basal area specifically, it is based more on land area, you know, lot size and percentage of land area. But many of those were only a 30% clearance, you know, so yet they were significant in terms of the amount of trees cleared. So that is one of the things that we wanted to control a little bit more.
Do you have any follow-up questions, Fran?
Yeah, I'm just kind of noodling a little bit. One on the basal area. So Deb, thank you for letting me know. I didn't realize this was in play in Maine. I'm wondering, you know, if Zach looked at any other towns in the state that are using this, and have any other towns looked at a proposed tree protection bylaw kind of in conjunction with solar, maybe independent, and what were the criteria that they were using? I wonder if any analysis had been done on that at all.
So I encourage any other ZAC members who might have some of this this research handy to jump in or raise your hand. But I also, I do know that we reviewed New Hampshire basal area law. It does not have to do with solar, keeping in mind that, you know, it's possible that they can't specifically assign this to solar, just like in Massachusetts. But I just wanted to point that out. There's so New Hampshire, we know, Maine, Alabama. I know Massachusetts uses basal area in the chapter 132 of Mass General Law, which is in, you know, in the forestry topic. So that's so it is used within the state, but I do not know that we have any examples of it being used for construction.
Sorry, can I interrupt just a second? So
Yeah.
Fran, was your question about what other towns are using basal area, or was it what other towns have some form of tree protection or tree clearing bylaw?
It's a little more the latter.
Oh,
here.
okay.
I mean,
So yeah, I can. Yeah, I think a fairly.
Please go ahead, Sundar.
Yeah. So I think quite a few towns in Massachusetts have tree protection bylaws. Not certain if they use basal area as a factor. So for instance, Concord, Mass has a tree protection bylaw. I think they've had it for probably a few years at this point. There are other examples that I can share with you. So Concord, Mass is one example. So we definitely are not the first ones. As to whether basal law is the main factor, I'm not certain about that. So the answer to that is not clear, but there are very many examples of tree protection bylaws in the state of Mass.
Thanks, Sundar.
And we don't know what they're using to be able to calculate or to make determinations around the amount of trees that are deemed acceptable.
There's a lot of flavors.
A lot of different
tree
ones.
protection bylaws.
All that list of things that we reviewed and rejected are being used in one place or another throughout the country.
So shade, percentage land, particularly large specimen trees. And I think it's worth noting that some of the bylaws are focused on protecting particular trees, and some of the bylaws are more focused on preventing large-scale clearing.
Yeah.
And
Species
then
and everything. So
the last question I had through the chair was, is this being prohibitive to any homeowner, or I gotta be careful how I couch this, from a development standpoint? I know this was, Mary, you mentioned as a companion bylaw to the solar proposal on the warrant. And we consider the other potential impacts, broadly speaking.
yes, but there's always other impacts that may not have been considered. This does apply to any development, with the exception of the exemptions. So a non-OSLPD residential development would need to comply.
Sorry, Mary, just to clarify, as I read it here, construction of roadways and associated infrastructure for subdivisions approved in accordance with the town's subdivisions rules and regulations is the exemption. So I think
that is just the roadways.
Just the road.
Okay, so OSLPD is, I think, under exemption number 2. And then the roadways are exempted for all subdivisions, as long as they're approved. Obviously, they have to go through the normal process.
Okay, got it. Thank you for that
the
clarity.
lots themselves and how they develop the lots and what they clear off of those lots is covered by this. So that does restrict. And let's see. Obviously, it does. It does mention the business and industrial, even though we're allowing a much larger amount of basal area to be cleared. Percentage of basal area to be cleared on those lots, but it still does restrict them in a way that they aren't restricted currently.
Sorry, just Fran, any further questions before we move on to Dave?
Please go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go ahead, Dave.
Well, I kind of wanted to jump in because that was a good segue to my question, and it seemed like Fran was done anyway. But the question I've been looking for, and and Mary, I totally support this. I'm going to vote for it, but it's more of a curiosity question between the open space and the conventional. So when I look at something as far as length of cul-de-sacs, we have a less strict regulation for open space than we do for conventional. And to me, I understand we want to encourage people for open space, but something like that, to me, it seems like it should be the same for both types of developments. So I was just curious. I obviously haven't thought about it at all, so I don't know any of the details, but what were the factors in including the open space and not the conventional?
So from the open space land preservation development special permits, we felt that the vast majority of those types of developments already preserve a large number of trees. And we felt that going through the process of this additional permit was not necessary and was burdensome to a development that we want to encourage. And so we did not want to place additional burden when we feel like the OSLPD, if you're going that route, it's doing all the right things that we've tried to encourage anyhow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm kind of just throwing it out there and thinking out loud. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions, Dave?
I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. Jane or Muriel, I don't think we've heard from either of you yet.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I may be asking a foolish question, but I can't quite figure this out. When the exemption is for a house lot, is there any exemption to the size or the clearing of the lot? Is it for, a certain percentage of the lot for the house? Like if there's a 5-acre lot.
If it's a 5-acre lot, we debated that.
Yep.
Sorry. Really did.
No, it's a good question.
I'm sure you did.
But yeah, no, we decided ultimately to exempt all residential lots that are, that are just individually owned for an individual house.
So it would only apply at the time that the house was being built or at any time?
It would not apply ever for those situations. It would not apply ever.
So
that means that essentially an individual homeowner has purview over their land unrestricted from that perspective. I mean, they have to comply with stormwater and building permit and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I'm just, so I should say thank you so much for all your work and so forth. But I guess my lingering concern is that many of our difficulties with clearing for solar come from people who are clearing their own personal lots. And let me also say, I would be more inclined to support people having autonomy over their own lots. So I don't know that you can solve my question for me. I just figure I'll throw it out there as that really troubling reality that we're confronting.
And the exemption B, which is really, really tiny on the screen here.
I'm looking at my screen, just so you know.
It says, basically the intent is, and this has yet to be given a final review by town council, but the intent is that somebody owns a lot. If they're going to clear it for something other than building a house, then it falls under this bylaw.
Oh boy.
But if they're going to clear it to build a house, then it doesn't fall under this bylaw. So it's only an exemption if they're actually building a house on the lot. Okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
So-
Thank you for the answer. It remains the ongoing challenge. Right?
Oh yeah.
So just to expand on that hypothetical situation, if somebody had a 5-acre lot and was going to build their house on it, they could clear the full 5 acres. And then at some later point in time, they could maybe sell 4 acres of it, at which point it's already cleared, at which point someone could conceivably install a commercial solar installation.
Or they could install one for themselves.
Or they could install it for themselves.
Yep.
Which is what we've had, what we've seen, right?
There are loopholes. There's always loopholes.
Okay.
That is true.
Muriel, any further questions?
No, I'm all
or
set.
comments?
Thank you so much.
Okay. Jane.
Oh, thank you, Mary, for all of your work and all of Zach's work. I know how hard you've worked on both of these bylaws. So just a couple of questions. I looked at the definition for the basal area that looked, it came from Alabama, as you mentioned before. And it looked like a very controlled growth area. And I think that that's also how we can look at basal areas in our area, like apple orchards and pine groves and things like that, that may have one species. When I look around Hopkinton, I'm wondering how this would be handled, where it's mixed forests. You know, we have deciduous, we have softwoods, we have pines, we have low growing bushes. And there's going to be a requirement, correct me if I'm wrong, to go in there and measure all the trees that are 3 inches or greater. And I'm just wondering how that's, if you've thought about the difficulty of encountering that scenario with a different type of a forest or woodland that we have in Hopkinton as opposed to some of these other controlled areas. And at what cost is, I'm sure it's going to fall on the developers, the builders, or the homeowners to pay for this. And am I understanding that they would have to hire a forester engineer to come in and do this calculation to figure out what the percentage of basal area, what it actually is and what it looks like? And my last thought is, I know in my area, there's quite a few invasive species. And you can go in there and some of those invasive species actually, like honeysuckle, for instance, have root systems of 3 inches or greater. How would you get in there to do an inventory of these large areas if you can't even get in there? I'm just wondering if you've thought about invasive species in these areas that already could be in these potential wooded areas, but it's not a clear-cut basal area. So I'm just wondering how, if you've thought about that at all.
Yes. Yes, we've thought about all of those things, actually. We don't necessarily have the definitive perfect plan to respond to it, but this is what we have in the bylaw currently. Certified arborists and or registered landscape architects or equivalent type of certification are required for creating these plans that would be needed for this permit. Yes. And I, let's see, in terms of invasive species, we definitely talk about having any replanting is done with native or naturalized species. I think that's the terminology we used. So, and that specimen trees, which are, considered to be, the best, the ones that are most desirable anyway, are the large ones that are a native or naturalized species. So, and replanting should be done with that type of tree. When we talk about the measuring the basal area, there are certainly estimates to be done. Yes, it is often used in forestry management, sometimes in a monoculture, but also oftentimes in a mixed tree growth. So it's forest management in terms of what is the best density to maintain the health of a woodland, to promote reseeding of trees and so on as well. And that's what it's used in silviculture or forestry, so that if somebody is using land for the purpose of growing trees to harvest and sell, they generally speaking are not clear cutting because they want to maintain a viable culture, and reseeding the trees and harvest it in an intelligent way, in a well thought out way. So that's why and maintaining the health of the trees is really important for that purpose. So I'm trying to remember all your questions. So, okay, so measuring the basal area. There are estimates that can be done by a layperson. In fact, some of the ZAC members tried it on their own properties. That does give at least an estimate. It is not good enough right now for the way we have this written. It does for the true application. It does need to be done by somebody certified. It does not mean going around and measuring every single tree on the property. That's not the way it's generally done. It is done through a cross section and just a subsection of trees are measured on a property and then extrapolated to the rest of the property based on the density of different areas of the property. So, and forgive me, I'm doing my best without being an expert on this myself. And let's see. Yes, the cost would fall on developers to be able to create this application to the standards that we have asked them to create it. So that is true. It is an additional cost for developers. Did I cover all of your questions?
Yes, I think so at this point in time. I'm sure there'll be more later.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I can help Mary a little bit, just if it's okay.
Go ahead, Deb.
In hiring the person that we went, it was through a tree company, and it was a $500 fee. She came out and she walked the site. She took notes of where the densest, thinnest trees were and tagged them with orange tags. And so those were the trees that were allowed to be taken down if we needed to. And then the other areas were the larger girth trees that were more spread apart, and those were not allowed to be cut down because of the density. And it was a rather simple, it didn't have to be an arborist. She has a technical certification. She works for the tree cutting service. Although it's always great to have more experience with an arborist because you can have a deeper conversation about what's going on with your trees, but it's not absolutely necessary. And she did a great job. So as far as any concerns, it would be, it's not a huge financial commitment.
And I do want to open it up to the public. I know there's a lot of interest in this. And Sundar, I know that I think it answered some comments earlier, but did you have any specific questions? I know you're also on Zach, but just wanted to check in before we move.
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. I think you've already answered my question. So let's go ahead and open it up to the public. So if you can either use the raise hand feature, which you can get to by clicking on the participants tab at the bottom, and then at the bottom of that screen, there is a raise hand feature. Or if John wants to go away from sharing his screen, then I can see more people. And if you wave furiously, I can see you that way as well. Mr. Joseph, you want to just introduce yourself and your address? And actually, we'll go ahead and unmute you first. That's probably helpful.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Chuck Joseph, 5 Benson Road, Hopkinton. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the people who've done work on this bylaw. I have several, I'm not in favor of the bylaw in its current form. I think in spirit, I have a great deal in accord with this bylaw. However, I think as it's currently written, it still needs some work. I think if we're all honest with each other, the residential and commercial development industries would not be here were it not for the commercial solar industry. And that once town council indicated that you couldn't be selective in which industries you applied this to, then the net was thrown over all development, and here we are. So there's a lot of things about this that concern me. One, probably first and foremost, is I'm not in favor of the basal area as a measurement. I've looked at it really hard. I've spent quite a bit of time researching it, and as Mary indicated in her attempts to explain it, it is primarily a forestry management tool. It was developed to manage the harvesting of trees in a forest area. It was never intended to be a formula used to calculate appropriate clearing area for construction of residential homes. So I think it's a significant misapplication of this formula in this context. I've asked many people, could you tell me what percentage of a lot you end up clearing using the basal area? And I have yet to have anyone tell me how that translates. So when I look at that, and I look at the 20% that was put under residential, and I think, is 20% enough? If we have to build a home and a septic system and driveways and clear enough trees to be safe for the inhabitants of the house, is 20% enough? It seems to me it might have been wise to look at the existing residential developments in Hopkinton that have been done so well, and to just look and say, what percentage of the lots are cleared? Why can't we just use a simple formula, look around at what we think is already successful? Because in the residential development, I don't think we've had a problem with clearing too much land. I think this arose from solar commercial applications. So in that area, I think it's a misapplication of a formula that was never meant for the way it's being put forward here. So given that, I think it's not necessarily good practice to vote on a bylaw that you don't understand the formula and its implications and what it's going to result in, and you have no precedent as to any community where it has been applied. So while the spirit of this law may not be inappropriate, the way it's being proposed, I think, could be disastrous. The other thing that occurs to me, and I don't know the legalities of this, but as I read the bylaw, if a developer abides by this bylaw and builds the home and passes the deed to a homeowner, is that homeowner now exempt from the bylaw? Does, in effect, the bylaw evaporate upon the passing of the deed? And if it does, then it's really not a tree preservation bylaw. It's a tree preservation bylaw during initial home construction, period. And then it evaporates. And that, to me, is not good local municipal law. And I think people need to look at this. I would strongly encourage Zach and the planning board to bring residential developers into the discussion and to let them talk to you about the pragmatics of their industry, and then work together, as we did with the open space bylaw that was brought to the planning board by the developers of Hopkinton some 30 years ago. So I'm encouraging that kind of collaboration. I don't think what people are doing is wrong. I think the way it's currently conceived may need some work.
Thank you. That's really helpful, Chuck. And but I would say that all the meetings that we held at the ZAC were open, and you were very much invited to comment and give us input along the way. And I really wish we had had more of it, because I think we could have put together an even better proposed bylaw. Thank you.
If I may, through the chair, Mary, I agree with you, but to be honest with you, I wasn't really going to be there for commercial solar hearings. They didn't apply to me. And that's what the majority of the hearings were until recently.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other comments or questions from the public? Mr. Brown, we can go ahead and unmute you. There you go. If you could just introduce yourself and your address to start.
Yep, Brian Brown, 12 Valker Road. I guess I'm just starting with a question. I'm sort of new to this debate, so forgive me my ignorance here on this. But this seems to be, based on what Mary was saying, it started with it developed from the solar conversations. How many lots are available for, are zoned for solar to actually, go into, I guess?
So currently solar can be built in any zone. So any lot that's more than 3 acres is effectively a candidate for commercial solar.
Okay. I guess I'm just sitting here as a layperson. This just seems like a lot to put in place. And again, I know a lot of work has gone into this from a lot of different people, but it seems like there's a lot of holes. It feels rushed to me in a way. It doesn't feel like, I see the bigger ramifications of other projects that, the town could miss out on because of this bylaw. And that's what concerns me. As of right now, I'm not in favor of this. It feels rushed. It feels like there are too many loopholes, too many things that we haven't thought through yet. Just out of curiosity, as an example, would, the Marathon Center, the Marathon Museum be impacted by this?
That's a good question. I don't know, because we haven't done that assessment. In general, I think that's a pretty big parcel, and I don't know how much of it they're clearing, but it would take some additional work to evaluate how that would be impacted and what resolution they might have to do if it was clearing a larger portion of land.
I mean, I guess to my point is I didn't see it in any of the exemptions where that would fall in. So I guess that's my point, is that it seems like all of those ideas haven't been thought through yet, and the ramifications of what projects may be prevented from something. I think a project like the Marathon Center is an unbelievable project for Hopkinton, and I'd hate to see it not come to fruition because of something like this, where maybe we could just change some zoning bylaws for commercial. And again, that's not, I'm a layperson. I don't know, how the zoning bylaws work for solar, but that's my
So Brian, just to answer your question about commercial solar, and what we can't do is so the state is very strict on any means which we might use to restrict commercial solar. So we can't actually, whatever, I'm not describing this very well and I should be better at this, but whatever bylaws we put in place can't be specific to solar. Solar is one step below a church in terms of being allowable in all zones. And if we do something that's perceived to be overly restrictive, then the legal guidance that we've received is that it would not hold up in land court. So
just to
town
clarify,
council has been
the direction we got was that it would be, they felt at this time it would be hard to defend, not that it wouldn't hold up. We haven't been told it's not defensible.
Yep, fair point.
And if I could add a little bit about the Marathon Center, and just my quick study, I'm sure some trees would need to come down, but it's primarily a field. It was a farmer's field. So it's not a wooded site at all. So, yeah. I'm just not sure would even enter into that formula.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's a bad example because I don't know the site as well as you all do, but I guess that's my point, is that what other opportunities will we miss out on because will the town miss out on great projects that haven't even been thought of yet, that my 6-year-old, 5-year-old and 4-year-old kids will miss out on because of we rushed to make a decision on a bylaw that maybe wasn't fully thought out while the project we may miss out on. That's my point.
Brian, just out of curiosity, are there other sort of situations you can think of that might be impacted by this? And I realize that the unknown is hard to predict, but just wondering if you have any other examples or specific concerns.
No, I don't. I mean, I don't have any projects in mind. I'm just thinking, you know, I guess not to get into a deeper debate, but I'm a little worried about, you know, property taxes and things along those lines, right? If we can't grow, you know, commercially or residentially, I'm a little bit worried about what happens to property taxes, where that money comes from, right? If a project like this is going to make it a lot harder to develop in town, commercially or residential, where's the money come from? And you know, I'm hearing talks about needing new schools. And again, my kids are little, right? So this stuff is very, very, very important to me. And I'm a little worried about what a tree cutting bylaw is going to do to commercial and residential growth in the future, and how that'll impact, you know, my family's life. It's real stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Brian. Mr. Foisey.
Thank you, Ron Foisey, 25 Chamberlain Street. Just a couple of concerns. The basal measurement issue and coming up with the right percentages for there. It's just very unclear to me where the numbers came from and what the impact is going to be. And it kind of ties in with the hurried nature of this. I believe our first hearing, Mary, on this was on February 1st. And, you know, it came up, and I feel like we're rushing to shoehorn this in. And I agree with everybody saying we want to protect the trees and the nature of Hopkinton, but I feel like we're rushing into this without good rationale, especially for the percentages, which really is the crux of all the enforcement on that. So I would just urge us to take the foot off the accelerator a little bit and dig into this, and you know, get more developers to weigh in on what the unintended consequences of a bylaw like this could be to our town. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mr. Foisey. Sundar.
Through the chair, I definitely wanted to call out that we knew that the percentages would be a point of contention. It would trigger a lot of debate. And I think we felt in the ZAC forum that by bringing this purely as a sampling of what percentages could look like would trigger a debate in the planning board. And our intent was to refine that based on discussions that the planning board would have. So I don't think by any stretch of imagination, those percentages are set in stone. As I said, this was more of a conversation starter, precisely what's happening here. And eventually we would refine those percentages as well. I think that is how even Mary prefaced introducing the tree bylaw, that was one thing that was probably most open to debate and further consideration. So I just want to call that out as something that is not, you know, written in stone just yet.
Muriel.
Yeah, I just want to push back gently on the fact that this was rushed. I think that the timing has been, you know, in the last few weeks. But I want to compliment Mary and the entire ZAC committee, and I want to make sure sometimes words matter, and just accepting them point blank worries me a little bit. This was work that the town council worked really closely with the ZAC and our town planner, and I think that it was very carefully constructed. Whether you support it or not, whether I support it or not, I just want to make sure that I appreciate the work and the thought and the legal expertise that has gone into this.
All right, thanks, Muriel. Are there other comments from the public? Give everybody just a second here.
Gary, when you get a moment, I just want to add one quick comment, please.
All right, and I see Mr. Doherty.
Jeff Doherty, 3 Angels Way. I don't see an exemption for somebody who is under a Massachusetts forestry program. And I'm wondering, you know, why that is.
Mary?
Well, that was one of the questions we had for town council. in our, I think our last meeting was essentially if there is a mass forestry permit or whatever it's called, does that automatically exempt them from the local ordinance? And therefore an exemption would not be necessary. Also, if it's, and I don't know the answer to that because town council has yet to give their comments on that. The other piece of this is that we don't necessarily want to encourage people to try to go around us and just go get a mass forestry program permit to clear cut and then do whatever they want. So if that is, if local ordinances still apply, then they should go through the local process. So, and finally, where this doesn't specifically reference the mass forestry, but silviculture is included under agriculture. So if they're doing this as a commercial silviculture process, it is exempt. And that the way that, and again, this is based on our understanding of the Mass General Law and our reading of the Mass General Law, and we're waiting for some input from town council on that last bit. But that is not, people would not be able to just clear cut once, sell the timber and call it silviculture, and therefore have the exemption of agriculture or silviculture because of the way it's defined in Mass General Law. That's our understanding of it. And I'm hoping that, town council will be able to weigh in on that as to whether or not we're correct. So that silviculture would really be an ongoing commercial operation in forestry. And that's very different than clear cutting and just selling the timber on a one-time basis. So we'll have to verify that part of it.
Okay. Did you have a follow-up, Jeff?
Well, through the chair, I appreciate the work, and I certainly understand the intent, and I'm in support of the intent of the bylaw. I've had a Massachusetts forestry program on my lot for 36 years. And part of that program is that a forester comes in and specifically marks trees, and they're not preserving the specimen trees and the big trees. They're harvesting those trees because those are that's where the money is in timber. And the timber market has gone right down the tubes over the past 5 years. So the money involved is nil. It's almost not worth them coming in to do what they're supposed to do. But I also sell firewood as a part of my business, and that has exploded over the past 5 years. So in addition to my forestry program, I'm taking some of the byproduct, which is the smaller stuff that's used for firewood, and being able to sell that. And if this bylaw goes into place, you're taking away my livelihood. So, I think it needs a little bit more work, but I'm certainly in favor of the intent, and I appreciate the amount of work that's gone into it in just the few meetings that I've attended.
All right, thanks, Jeff. I have a proposal, but Dave, I know you had a comment or a question first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a comment that, we heard the town, wanting to take some action on solar. We've done that by hopefully putting 3 different options out there for the town to vote on. And I have no problem with the first 2 because it's very focused on solar, and I don't think that's the best use of our the big benefit to the town. But this last one does sound like it has, from what I'm hearing, some concerns from the developers. And I know that this town has some good developers that really take into consideration what's best for the town in addition to their own livelihood. But so that's, I'm getting, a little hedging back and forth on this last one. So just want to make that point.
Yeah. Fran, quickly before I get to my proposal.
I'll echo Dave's point, but the only add, it's more than just the developers. I think Mr. Doherty brought up a point that he has a business that potentially is impacted here. And I think, his feedback and perspective is, I think is appreciated because there's a broader context here of impact. So I'll leave it at that. And I'd like to just chew on it a little bit more.
Yeah. So, yep, Mary.
Okay. I just wanted to, let everybody on the board know that I am completely open to this going back to Zach, and we're working on it more. I think that this process has been really important. We've learned a lot. And we didn't, answer every question that we wanted to answer. So that I don't want anybody to feel like they're, kicking us for the work we've done. It's perfectly understandable and acceptable. And I would be very willing to take this back to Zach.
So I've just been kind of taking some notes here, and maybe I can use this to kind of summarize the perspective that I'm hearing. And what I've done is I've kind of boiled it down to 5 points. The first is that we need to make sure that we understand unintended consequences. And I think that it sounds like we have really good alignment, that people like the idea of doing something like this. Many other towns do. The devil's in the details, but we have to understand those unintended consequences. And so that's number one. Number two, I think we need to explore the exemptions a little bit further. And in particular, Mr. Doherty brought up, I think, a really good point. Should participation in the Massachusetts forestry program be grounds for an exemption? Should we consider municipal projects? I've heard that several times, but I think we want to give that some additional thought. The third area of discussion for me is on those numbers of 20% in residential and agricultural, 70% in industrial, business, and professional office zones. And I think that Zach has done a great job. They've gotten to a number, but I think that given that this is a new term, and I generally, I'll tell you, I've been back and forth in the Basel area. I think it's a really smart application. I think it's maybe it's not embraced, and it's not sort of, people don't have a gut instinct for it, but the same is true for most of the stormwater terms that we use. That doesn't mean they're not good. They're good terms to use. It just means that the average public doesn't necessarily understand them. I think it's our job to make sure that we can characterize this in a way that people can get their arms around it. And I think that we've got to put a little bit more assessment into determining what those numbers are. The fourth area for me is, I'm a little apprehensive about exempting residential properties in the way they are. And I get the intention of trying to minimize how people are impacted, but I think that just opens up a lot of loopholes that would enable people to subvert the intentions of this. And I'm not sure that opening that up to every individual property owner is necessarily any more friendly to a developer or to even an individual homeowner, unless they have intentions beyond their single family home. And then I think the fifth piece is, just that we're still waiting on some weigh-in from town council. I think the one thing that I didn't include in here is the concept of basal area, and I know that several folks commented that they didn't think that made sense. My personal opinion, I think it's just we could certainly simplify and go with percentage land clearing. That's easy for people to get their arms around. Although I'd argue that basal area in many ways is going to be more closely aligned. It's going to be a better measure to strike a balance, in particular, in an initiative to avoid this large tree clearing operation. So that could potentially be a sixth one, but that's just kind of my perspective. So those are, the 5 or 6 sort of points of consideration that I think we need to address before we move this forward. I'll pause there. I think that if it was the will of the board to do so, we could try to address those over the next couple of weeks, or I think we've also heard from folks that this just feels a little bit rushed. Do we consider really applauding Zach for this initiative? I think it's aligned with our master plan. It's aligned with a lot of assets that the town really values, but do we send it back to Zach and have them refine this and put a little bit more thought, work with a broader community than maybe was previously at Zach, and come back for the following year with something that feels really, really flushed out and robust.
Through that, Mr. Chair, I'll put a motion to not put this on the town meeting for this year.
It's on the town meeting warrant, right?
Yeah, so we could recommend no action.
You recommend no action. Okay, that's the best way.
Is that right, John?
You can also actually vote to remove it from the warrant.
We could vote to remove it.
What's the deadline for that? I'm sorry, through you, Mr. Chair.
I don't know the official deadline, but I've heard sooner rather than later.
So 2 comments on that. One, I think that the warrant is signed off on April 13th.
That's what I thought.
The warrant is also already out for review among all the different boards in town. So we have a motion to.
Let me modify the motion then, because
Okay.
it seems like it would be best if we recommend no action. So it seems like that's a safer route. If that's, I'd like to make that motion.
We'll get to discussion first in a minute, but is there a second?
Yes, Sundar Sivaram second.
Okay. Discussion, Mary.
I would recommend withdrawing this from the warrant entirely.
The challenge, I think, with recommending no action is that it can still be debated and discussed. It's just that the planning board isn't taking a formal position on it.
So not to hedge through you, Mr. Chair, but that was my first preference, but it almost sounded like we'd be too close to the deadline and we're not sure we can do that. So.
No, we can do that per John's comments.
Through the chair, you'd have to remove both the zoning bylaw and the general bylaw.
Yeah.
Okay. Fran, did you have a discussion point?
Yeah, I'm in that camp as well to remove it. So I'm just wondering if Dave is interested in making a.
Certainly, I'll go back to my original motion.
Okay, so Dave would be moving to remove the tree clearing zoning bylaw and general bylaw from town meeting warrant.
I'll second that.
All right, discussion. Rob, did you have a? You're muted, Rob.
Can't hear you, Rob.
Sorry. It's unclear, but it seems like we have time to send this back to Zach, and they've been able to make great strides in each individual meeting, and it might not take more than. I think we could get a long way closer to having a more informed, educated discussion by our next meeting, or maybe even our subsequent meeting after that. And it seems haphazard to kick this down the road for a whole year plus, when there could be great strides in the next and before we have to make a final decision.
Mary?
Although I do appreciate your confidence in us, and that having a deadline certainly makes us really efficient. I also think it's been a huge amount of pressure for the Zach and for John. over the last 6 weeks or more, because we were working on the solar bylaw first and then it turned into 2 or 3 bylaws. So I would respectfully suggest that we give us a year to work on it.
All right, Jane?
I agree with Mary in that it would also provide an opportunity to include a more collaborative effort to include the developers and realtors in the conversation. And Zach may be able to figure out how to do that over a period of time.
Okay. Muriel, you're muted, Muriel.
Yeah, not anymore. I totally agree. And again, I applaud the effort. I totally agree that we need more time. And I always agree that including as many stakeholders as possible is preferable. I do also know that these meetings are open and it's up to the stakeholders to be proactive on their part and get to the meetings, hopefully. The one thing that keeps sort of nagging at me is when we craft a bylaw, I want to make sure we know what issue or problem we're addressing. And this one still feels like we're trying to get to solar using a mechanism that doesn't call out solar. So it's all, unless I see it differently, it's always going to feel a little ill-fitting. Like I just want to make sure that we're really tackling the problem that we see in front of us with whatever bylaw we're pursuing.
Yeah, thanks, Muriel. All right, so we have a motion, we have a second. I think we're ready to vote unless there's any further discussion.
Point of order through the chair.
Yes.
There was a motion and a second on Dave's second motion. So I think that needs to be either withdrawn or voted on, and then we can go, because he didn't go back to his original one. He said he did, but he didn't, and because Muriel then seconded it.
So do you want me to withdraw my second?
So yeah, withdraw both your previous motions and then state your new motion.
Okay, I would like to withdraw both my previous motions and make a motion to remove this item from the town meeting.
And just to clarify, that would be both the proposed general bylaw and the proposed zoning bylaw.
Both general and zoning.
I'll second that.
Okay. And assuming no further discussion, we will take a vote. Rob?
Rob Benson, no.
Muriel?
Muriel Kramer, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Deb?
Deb Byberg, no.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes. So that motion carries, and we will withdraw these from the town warrant. Lots of work to do on this. Appreciate people that came, that showed up tonight. I think that, now is the time to engage. I think that Zach is more than willing to work with you, but keep an eye out, because I think that this is going to be on their agenda as they move forward, and and encourage you to engage on how to put forward a bylaw that's the right mix and the right fit for Hopkinton. So thank you, Mary. You guys have done a ton of work, and I think that just even getting this out in the open and talking about it is going to drive a lot of really healthy engagement over the next 6 months or so, and hopefully it'll enable us to bring something even better forward.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just one add-on comment.
Sure, Dave.
So Mary, yes, once again, thank you. And I might suggest that you even come before us numerous times instead of trying to go off and do a perfect bylaw, to periodically touch base with the planning board and just to get a feel for, what works, what doesn't work for everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. That's it for tonight. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Sundar Sivaraman, so moved.
Second.
Rob Benson, second.
All right, Sundar with the motion, Rob with the second. Assuming no discussion, we'll vote. Rob,
Rob Benson, yes.
Muriel,
Muriel Kramer, yes.
Jane,
Jane Marin, yes.
Dave,
Dave Paul, yes.
Mary,
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Deb,
Deb Feinberg, yes.
Sundar,
Sundar Sivaram, yes.
Fran,
Randy Young, yes.
and Gary Trindle is a yes. So everyone have a great night, stay warm, and we'll see a good chunk of you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Here.